And we're live. Hello, good evening. This is Deacon Joseph Sweden. Bishop Enoch is in the chat. Hold on. Okay, sorry about the delay, and thank you for your patience. I know that sometimes we do run behind, but rather than reschedule, we were so close, we decided we're going to try to get everything in there and get to this stream. We have a lot of new plans coming, so we're doing a lot more stuff, and hopefully we should have some interesting programs. I see there's already questions in the chat, which is encouraging because we're going to be glad to answer them. I'm hoping Bishop Enoch should be here in just a moment. Give me a moment. Okay. Okay, give me just a moment here. Thank you again for your patience. Okay. So, as I mentioned, the title of this particular episode is odd, to say the least, because basically I'm referring to the memory hole. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept, 1984, etc. Many of the things that I took for granted and learned about as I became true Orthodox and as I grew are things that have become arcane knowledge, even to the effect of not being able to find them anymore. And because of this, I thought it would be important to address some of these things that have been glossed over, which in some cases make it much harder for somebody new to Orthodoxy to even realize that these things happened, because they've been glossed over so much that it's almost as if people aren't aware they exist. A few people, in reading the life of Father Seraphim Rose, realize how much time he corresponded and dealt with what we would call the traditionalists in Rokor, many of whom joined ROAC or the old calendar, the True Orthodox, etc., because the version of his life that is being passed out is very sanitized. In any case, let me see here. So basically, that's the reason I brought up both Not of This World and Elder Theodore, is because there's a lot of things to talk about in terms of misconceptions when it comes to the history of Father Seraphim and Platina. So there's going to be some things that we're going to talk about in early editions of Not of This World compared to later editions that I wasn't even aware had changed so dramatically. The version of Not of This World that I had read, for example, talks about after the repose of Father Seraphim, talks about Father Herman joining. He joins the Pangratio Synod, but in reality, he had joined. Pangratios was for a while independent, and then was under Maximus of Athens. So the point is that there's a lot more to the history that's unknown. One gets the impression reading the newer edition that they sort of just floated around until they found the Serbians, and that's not what happened. Give me just a moment. Benedicite.
Benedicite.
I can't hear you.
Benedicite.
With very low volume.
I do not know what's happening.
Okay. Okay, so I see that, we're, as I mentioned, as we got on, this kind of episode is what we're doing. It's called Fight the Memory Hole. We're dealing with Not of This World, Elder Theodore, talking about things that have been largely hidden from the new, I guess you'd say from, what's the word we're looking for? New converts to Orthodoxy, because they've literally just been edited out over the years.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of things that we want to clarify that are handy to understand the history more properly. And so,
okay.
Let me see here.
Well, the first thing to mention, I suppose, might be that Russia's Catacomb Saints. All right. One of the most useful books is no longer in print, or is no longer reprinted again by Platina.
Oh, by the way, it was my audio, Vodika. It wasn't
it
you. It was,
okay.
Yeah, I had it too low.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
And the excuses given are essentially that the excuses given are essentially that it contains material offensive to the Moscow Patriarchate.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially it. Why does it contain a material offensive to the Moscow Patriarchate? I mean, because it presents the case of the new martyrs.
Yeah, many of the new martyrs had no communion with the Patriarchate. So
Yes.
told people not to have communion with the Patriarchate, and told them to stay away from it.
Whoa. Yep. So that's one example of it. What's that noise in the background?
That was a dog.
Oh, okay. All right. Do you want to bring up some other related matters to it?
Yeah. Well, the problem with the Platinum Monastery and the St. Herman Press is that it became very selective in terms of what they would produce. They realized that with Father Seraphim, they basically had a cultus on their hands, and because many people understood him to be, a native American saint.
After Father Seraphim reposed, right? There was a cultus of devotion formed around him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in his memory. All right.
And so basically, this is when they realized this. It's important to remember that even though Platina was separated from the Rocor, they were still at times they were under Archbishop Maximus of Athens. Some of their people actually joined our synod, and so there was. I noticed that there were some questions that popped up, and so I want to put up the first question, which is, I think this one's pretty easy to take, Valika. Jonathan Britt asks, can you please touch on the historical significance of Elder Theodore and his connection to the Catacomb Church? I read that he ended up in a monastery in Blanco, Texas.
Mm-hmm. He died here.
Here
at the Abbey.
Yeah. But, the Abbey of the Holy Name in New Jersey.
In Jersey. Yeah, it was before the Abbey joined our church, the Metropolia or Autonomous Orthodox Metropolia. But I mean, this is where he reposed. Blanco joined, I think, Rocor back in 1987 or 88. And they were part of Rocor until what, like 2000 or 1999 or something like that.
Yeah, once the court case.
It was about that time that the whole scandals broke out.
Right.
Now, it was Archbishop Konstantin Osinski, who was the Rocor bishop that ended up at the monastery in Blanco. He was the one that lived like there for 4 years before he died, the last 4 years of his life.
Okay.
And Archbishop Constantine actually liked it. I mean, I don't think he knew what was going on with Father Benedict Green, if you know what I mean. I mean, I don't think he was involved in any of that. So, I mean, connection, Elder Theodore's connection was that he knew Archbishop Constantine, and I think he encouraged like the people in Blanco to leave Pangratius and to not be associated with him.
Right.
Because sort of everybody who had been under Pangratius, the infamous Pangratius back in the 80s and 90s, they eventually became more and more nervous about, being around him because of obviously his own scandals and such. Elder Theodore's connection to the Catacomb Church would have been that if you look in Russia's Catacomb Saints, I think it's like page 616 or 660, 619. You'd have to tell me, Father Joseph. I mentioned it into the chat a few days ago.
Yeah, I think it was 614 or something.
Yes, if you look at the bottom of the page, Father Seraphim Rose does give him as a source because he did know, people back in the late 1919, 20, 21, early 20s who had been, monks and clergy that were martyred. I don't know how much contact he had after the late 30s and 40s, since he was in Western Europe at the time and such. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying, he may have had some contact. The problem is that a lot of the material he had, he sent to Father Seraphim.
Yeah.
So it's at Platina, assuming they preserved it. And, I don't know if they're not exactly going to let us look through the archives there. So
Yeah, that's
I mean, Elder Theodore's father was a major general in the Russian army, in the Imperial Army. For I mean, that's a lot of times.
so I think we need to give a little bit of background on his childhood because of where
Okay.
he's
So now
from.
remember, this is from an historical perspective, because I'm not trying to denigrate. I'm just saying he reposed at the abbey, but the abbey was part of a previous jurisdiction before it joined us. So even though there's a personal continuation, if you know what I mean, like in terms of persons here. He was born around. He was actually probably born around 1900 or 1901. Maybe, though it's generally given at 1905. His father was a major general in the Russian army. They were from sort of this Estonian and German families that had lived in the Russian Empire since the 1700s. His father was I believe, instructor in mathematics and physics, also at maybe the Orangeburg Military Academy.
Yeah.
And I think he taught military mathematics. I mean, I think that was really things like artillery.
He was a general, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. He was a major general, Kindrel Major or something like that. Was the Estonian version. He had five brothers, I believe. One of them died in the Civil War. His father was a general in the army during the Civil War. Though when the Bolsheviks took over the country, his father went to Istanbul, where a lot of the Russian expatriates went in. By that time, George, that was his baptismal name, had gone to Finland and at Valam and such.
And it's worth noting now.
And I believe, and I am
convert.
As I see, the Estonians were mostly Lutherans,
mm-hmm.
And his father converted to Orthodoxy before he died. All right, from what I remember, the account I was given. So he was buried in the Orthodox cemetery because he'd actually converted to Orthodoxy sometime after going to Istanbul. However, he had due to the influence of like some family friends. At least Elder Theodore, who was as a baby, was baptized in the Orthodox Church, and I think some of the other brothers were baptized in the Orthodox Church as well. And I think the idea of his father had was he will just have the kids baptized in the church, even if he wasn't. So they had, I think, a nanny who was like the godmother or something like that. He just. His father also did meet with the Tsar. I mean, that's not that controversial, simply because anybody who is a military commander is going to meet with the Tsar, especially during World War II. And
yeah, if I remember, Elder Theodore, he would play. Well, when he was young, he would play with the Tsarevich as a child.
Yes, I mean, yeah, and the reason I'm not trying to like generalize. I'm just saying that anybody who's like, if your father is a general and you go to the Imperial Palace and you're a kid, you're going to meet, the Tsarevich, or you're going to meet the kids of the royal family. So, you can play with them and whatever. I guess they play tennis. I'm not exactly sure of the games and things. So his father died in 1921, and then Father George, he became Father Sergei because he took the schema in Valam. And then he, I believe, during the time of the late 1920s, there was conflict between the Soviet Union was sort of putting a lot of pressure on Finland, and they wanted a lot of people to leave Finland if they were connected to like the old white movement or to the imperial family, or some, if they were like sort of minor nobility. So I think he and others were made to leave, and they went to, I think he went to Germany, initially. No, he may have gone to Estonia. And eventually he found his way in the late 1930s into Germany and France. And he was a priest by that time, I believe. And I think he was, in fact, made a bishop like in 1945 or 46. by some like some of the bishops associated with this Metropolitan of Logi of Paris, because they have this fear that sort of the Soviet government was going to kill all the Orthodox bishops outside of Russia that would not that were claiming to be Russian Orthodox that wouldn't submit to the Soviet government. So anyway, he then came to Canada, and eventually he joined the then, and it was the early 50s, by that time in the late 40s, the Metropolia, which would have been Metropolia in that sense would have been the
Russian Metropolia.
The pre OCA, and they did not accept him to serve as a bishop. Another person who joined the OCA at the time, or the pre OCA, that according to Validity of Theodore, he said that Father Alexander Schmemann had actually been consecrated a bishop back in 1946, and he had taken monastic vows, and his wife had done it, but they kind of he didn't want to. I guess he backtracked on that, and which is kind of interesting. That might explain why Father Schmemann thought he had all this power and authority to do whatever he wanted in the OCA. He served as a priest with them in Alaska. He was initially sent up to Alaska to take care of the relics of St. Herman. There's a controversy with that, since there was a Father Gerasim up there who already was taking care of the relics. The controversy was also, part of it wasn't quite clear who was in charge of Alaska, because Rocor claimed people up there, the Metropolia claimed people up there. I believe the Father Gerasim figures, some people claim he was part of the OCA, some claim he was part of the Rocor. I don't know the reality of it. There was a conflict between the two over this, and eventually then Father Theodore simply moved to another island or something like that. Our Father Deacon John, before he reposed, he had gone up to Alaska and he collected a lot of material, testimonies and things like that. I mean, I don't have them on hand at the moment, so I'm just going off of memory from what I remember. And so, that happened, and then he moved to Nevada, and he then moved to Mexico. And I'm not quite sure the reason for moving to Mexico. There may have been some Russians down there that he knew that wanted him to move there. And eventually, I'm skipping around here because again, I don't have all the material before me. In the mid '80s or late '80s, he was sort of convinced to go visit this this sort of group or monastery. I'm not quite sure, that was in New England, and he didn't like it there, and they didn't let him leave. I mean, they weren't like physically keeping him, but they didn't drive him anywhere. And the reason was he got there and discovered they had married bishops. He's like, this is not acceptable. It's not a good situation. And eventually, what happened is, because he had known Vladika John when Vladika John was a priest and visited him in Mexico, he wrote a letter to the abbey here, and he said, "Can you please do something to help me?"
I noticed that South Padre Tony notes the white priest. That was actually a term that was commonly used. I know people of Mexican descent who actually knew of Elder Theodore precisely like that.
Well, if you do, please put them in contact. I mean, I'd like to record reminisce, kind of memoirs, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's just I don't myself. A lot of people are just dying who would have known things. Like Father Deacon John, he passed away.
He actually knew people. There were people who were talking about miracles that were occurring with his cross.
So exactly. So what happened is, Vladika John at the time had some people who knew Russian, and they would write letters to Vladika Theodore at this other place in New England. I don't remember exactly where New England it was. And the letters said, "Look, we're going to send this one monk there. He's going to go to confession to you." And how they would do confession is they would kind of go out by the car, and I guess these people of this other group said, "Well, we will let them do that." They didn't make much of a big deal about it. Anyway, the letter said, if you want to come to the Abbey, get in the car, and the monk will drive you there. All right, and that's what happened. And he,
Now this
Father Deacon Vincent may have visited him in Mexico. Yeah, he may have visited him in Mexico. I'm going to have that. I'd have to ask him next time I see him. Who is South Padre Tony? I mean, I hate to ask him, but
he's a longtime supporter of the show.
Okay.
I have a suspicion. I'm starting to.
All
think
right. Well, don't dox him right now. I shouldn't.
I'm not
say
doxing.
that.
I'm not doxing.
So,
we're
okay,
keeping your secret identity.
Okay,
South
all right.
Padre Tony.
All right. Because he knows Father Vincent. That's good. He's a good guy. So he came to the Abbey here, and he stayed for the last 6 years of his life. Now, what's interesting in regards is that there was in regards to like the Blanco stuff. This Father Benedict did visit him at the Abbey here, about like in 94 or 95, and Valedica Theodore simply would not talk to him. From what everybody says, he did not. He said there. All of Valedica Theodore said was there's just something wrong with him. And he didn't elaborate on that. And I don't know if that's because God had revealed to him there was this corruption in his heart already, and he wasn't repenting of it, because everybody knows about the accusations and the convictions of Father Benedict. As to why Rocor would take in, I mean, that's sort of also the hidden history of Rocor, how they have to clean up their own history, how they took in all these people and they sort of attack others, but they had their own scandals, which are pretty terrible.
Yeah.
All right. That doesn't mean, I'm not saying Rocor wasn't a church in 1990, but churches can make horrific mistakes and then get embarrassed about it. So now what's interesting is there was this attempt by people in Rocor to try to essentially do a Metropolitan Vitale on Elder Theodore. All right. Which is to say, oh, he's a Russian monk. He really belongs in Spring Valley, and he's not going to be taken care of very well at the Abbey. And so they got like the DIFUS involved. Anybody who starts getting DIFUS involved in these situations that doesn't need to be involved, there's some scummy stuff going on in this. That's why I never really had a positive view of Rocor in terms of all the personnel. And so they sort of made him go to the hospital and Elder Theodore was like, no, I don't want to be here. I don't want to go to Spring Valley. I want to just go back to the Abbey. And they sort of tried to convince him to go. And the doctor basically said, look, nothing's wrong with him. There's nothing happening. And I mean, Valedica John remembers all the events. That was before my time and such.
Yeah, that was like Bishop Hilarion was spearheading that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Hilarion of not our Bishop Hilarion, but Bishop Hilarion.
No.
Future Metropolitan Hilarion. I mean, he was also the one that tried to steal the church in Woodstock back in the 90s too, and he did a few other things, which is, he'd always say, "Well, I'm doing it for your own good, and I want to help you," So. Don't just beware of Russians coming and saying they want to help you. I don't want to be too mean to Russians, obviously.
Or sound too much like Ronald Reagan.
Exactly, because obviously that's too broad of a brush. So that happened, and what's odd though, and this is how I first we can bring it back to the issue about like memory holding things. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you read the things written by Father Herman, who I just becoming more and more seems to have been a more nefarious figure the more you read about him. One of the things is that he wrote a book, I think, called The Monks of the Lagoon or something like that, or the Monks of the Lagoon of Alaska. I can't quite remember the name of the title. And in it, he mentions, Father Sergius / Elder Theodore, Schema Bishop Theodore Irtel. And he says he died in Juarez, Mexico in 1996. Okay. Well, that's a lie. Father Herman, I know from people who remember it, came and visited Elder Theodore here like a few weeks before he died, or a few months before he died. Okay, and he'd asked us to call him when Elder Theodore died, and we did. And the funeral was here, and Vladika Theodore was buried like 2 miles down the road in the cemetery. All right. Why did he lie and say he died in Juarez, Mexico? All right. I know you may. Do you have any you want to say? I mean, I don't just want to be the only one talking.
My personal feeling is that basically, I hate to say this, but a lot of the time, okay, yeah, Jonathan Britt put the title "New Valam at Monk's Lagoon."
Yes. Okay.
The point is that a lot of the time, I hate to say this, but again, it comes back down to, is the cultus useful? And I think that they found that would be counterproductive if it wasn't, at the very least, if we can't have them, then no one will find them. As awful as that sounds, but this was also true with the book Not of This World.
I mean, if Rocor could have kidnapped him successfully and brought him to Spring Valley, I'm sure they'd be saying, "Oh, this great holy man died here," and I mean, right, exactly. It's so right. Is the cultus useful, or are they going to do what we want them to do?
Right.
And when you start having sort of cultus in a negative sense, when it becomes like a stereotypical cult, all right, around Platina, what happens is that every change they make, they sort of have to rewrite their history, sort of like 1984-ish. You know, we were always enemies with East Asia. Oh no, we were always allies with East Asia. All right, and such. So, I mean, that's the basics. Are there any other related points we want to talk about? Such.
So someone's trying to connect, but it says devices not connected. So
I don't really want to interview people tonight, if that's all right.
That's fine. I mean, I can take the calls, but they're not. If you're trying to connect, you're not connecting. But so that's part of the reason why I mean, recently I noticed that when I looked at the newest edition of Not of This World, the entire ending doesn't read the way I remembered reading it in 2003.
What is Not of This World again?
That's Father Sheriff from Rose's Life and Works. It was eventually expanded to be called Not of This World.
Okay.
But the entire absorption of the Holy Order of Mans into what would become the Christ the Savior Brotherhood is almost completely deleted because it's all post-Rocor. And so it's just kind of amazing when you see that. And so give me just one moment. Hold on. I see someone's waiting, but I'm just going to put a note here. Anyway, so that's part of what we're talking about today, because this is something that, I mean, we're encountering now. As we've started to have more public debates, etc., the amount of poor information is incredible. South Padre Tony asks, any chance Vladika Theodore will be translated to the Abbey?
The problem was trying to exhume a body in New Jersey. It's a rigmarole. You gotta, especially if you tell the judge we want to take the body and move it to a shrine in the church. You gotta have the funeral director. You gotta have people sign off on it. We'd have to have an appropriate place already constructed. I mean, it would be something. I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying it's a more involved. We've been trying for years to get everything settled with our own cemetery. I mean, we theoretically have somewhere we can bury people, theoretically, but we don't have all the approvals yet, because you have to get all the neighbors within like a mile radius or something like that to accept having a cemetery, even if it's in the back of the woods, up several hills, and they're never going to be.
They're never going to see it, but still they have to be informed because they're the neighbors,
so examining
palm greasing, etc.
Well, I mean, obviously we're not going to.
No, but I'm saying some neighbors might be like, I'm not going to sign this unless I get $1,000 or something.
Yeah, well, we're not going to pay them $1,000, but we're not going to pay them anything. But but my point was that, again, exhuming a body from a cemetery, unless you have a lot of lawyers, and
it's a question that's worth asking once we have the cemetery set up.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather it be done then, because obviously we just can't. Okay, well, we're going to exhume the body. What are we going to do with it? Just get a new coffin and set it in the church? I mean, there are churches that do that where they have relics of saints under a glass covering. You've seen those before, I assume, right, Father?
Yeah, I saw one in
Yeah.
Greece. Yeah.
Yes, and I don't know. Is Saint Alexei Toth? Is he?
He is, but it's a wooden casket. It's not clear, and
You can't
there's an
see. You
icon
can't
over
see
it.
the
You
relic.
can't see it. No.
Okay. All right. So I mean, so maybe obviously in the future. So.
And now, Blind G Tech asks, is some of this information preserved in the Orthodox archive? I'm going to go wildly out on a limb and say no. And the reason for that is because while the Orthodox archive has released a lot of useful information, it is, I don't want to say it's unidirectional, but it does kind of appear to point in a certain direction. Like stuff that is favorable to like the relations that they had with the True Orthodox Church of Greece is coming out. But I think it would be interesting to see the information that comes out concerning the Milan Synod, etc. And I don't realistically see that happen. A lot of narratives that have been long-standing for the past couple of decades, which can now come out due to modern technology, people don't want to talk about them yet.
Yeah,
and
well,
that's fine. We will, but the point is...
Just to, mention Elder Theodore again, for years, people denied his father was a general in the Russian Army. He just made that up. I remember hearing people telling me that to my face. Oh, that never happened. Where's the evidence? Well, the problem was that none of us I didn't know him, but the people I know who knew him never believed Ludwig Theodore lied to them about that. All right. But how are we supposed to prove it? We didn't have access to like archives in Russia. Well,
now we do.
What I was able to find was in the past 10 years was we have the internet now, and you also have the Estonian internet, and there's there's a genealogical website. I think I've linked it to you. I don't know if you have the links.
Let me see if I can.
That it had the information, and then it had linked to Russian sites, and it's like, well, lo and behold, exactly what Elder Theodore said, his father had been a major general in the Russian army, was true. All right, it was documented in because there's sort of like people who do also a Russian genealogical history about officers of the White Army and what have you. Elder Theodore, since his father and his mother had come from a Lutheran family, he had made mentions that his either one of his uncles or something like that had been head of the Lutherans, I think he said he had been sort of like an archbishop of Lutherans. I don't know if that's the exact phrase, something like that. And people said, well, what are they talking about? And his uncle was not the Archbishop of Uppsala, which is not quite what he said. And lo and behold, you look on the genealogical sources, and I think it was his uncle and his grandfather have been part of like the Lutheran spiritual consistory. They were like sort of like the higher superintendents, which is like an archbishop for the Lutherans in the Russian Empire. Even though Vladika was obviously baptized Orthodox and such. So
I did put in the chat. I put in a link to the genealogical history for Father for Elder Theodore. But what you'll notice is it does actually say he's in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and that's where he died.
That's not where he died exactly.
He's here in the Northeast in New Jersey. So, but that's to give you an idea of how deep the rabbit hole goes in terms of when people want to cover something.
I mean, there are probably other reasons people in Russia, if they're even interested, would not want to say he died here because obviously they don't like us. One is that Elder Theodore said that when he was a priest in Estonia, that he had baptized the.
This is funny.
He what he told people is that he had baptized people from the Ridiger family, the babies of the Ridiger family. You know the Ridiger family, right?
Yeah, that's a patriarchal estates family.
Exactly. Second, that he was the one who baptized him as a baby in like the 30s in Estonia and carried him through the altar and such.
Yeah.
And I mean, it didn't mean he had any other connection other than he was the one who baptized him.
No, it's just interesting trivia that Elder Theodore baptized patriarchal estates.
I think
there weren't that many priests there, so it makes sense.
Yes. So So a lot of this was sort of personal recollections, people who knew him over the years of, this is what he repeatedly said. My father was a general. My father was a mathematician and a physicist also. Like, oh, that can't be. How could his father be a general and a mathematician and physicist? Well, there's the archives now. His father was a major general and he taught physics and mathematics. At a military, higher physics and mathematics at a military academy. Which, all right. So this is
Padre Tony. He did ask, is there much of a push for his glorification?
There was previously. There was. It's just things have died down. Because we have a lot of other things going on.
Not only that, I mean, the main person who was doing all the research, Father John Nelson, passed on a few years back, and so that kind of slowed everything down. My suggestion is just keep. So
we'd also have to exhume the body to is the body incorrupt? I mean, that alone would not be a deal breaker because obviously most bodies of saints aren't necessarily incorrupt and such.
Now this Jonathan Brett points out perhaps the Pangradios Riones scandal muddied the water for these groups. There's no doubt about that. And I don't want to. I mean, I find myself in an uncomfortable position when it comes to thinking about things like Father Herman, or even after the debate, thinking about things like Father Panalena. As horrible as the things that they've been accused of in the past. I mean, in theory, as much as I hate to say this, if they sincerely confessed and repented at some point, that can't really be held against them. I just don't know what to think anymore about that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's one thing to be forgiven if you repent. It's another thing to say you should continue in church office after you've done.
Yeah, well, he did technically in the case of Father Panalena, he just died. But in the case of Father Herman, he did step down, even though he stayed a monk.
Okay. All right.
I just don't know. But the lies, that's unfortunate.
I mean, obviously, Pangradios was an odious figure. I mean, everybody, and I mean, to be honest, they were odious figures in the OCA too. I mean, anybody who knew exactly what Theodosius and Herman's personal lives, and it was Pangradius like.
That's the point. Now the fact that
I know for all that
later,
no, people knew at the time. I knew people. I knew people from the 80s in the OCA. And it was an open secret about Theodosius.
Well, right? I didn't know about Theodosius. I just thought he looked funny. I knew about the case. There was a case in New York in the cathedral where even
Theodosius got arrested. I mean, for soliciting an underage boy in the 80s.
Wait, really?
Yeah. I mean, his name was Frankie Lazar, which was the legal name. I mean, everybody sort of knows this. This is not. I mean, it's not.
You're going to be shocked, but I actually didn't.
All right. Well, I don't want to talk too much about because I'm now going on the gossip, and I really shouldn't do that.
Well, that's not really gossip if everyone knows about it. I mean, and he did.
Well, they went before a Greek judge, and the Greek judge was like, don't do this again," and what have you.
Because then he ended up in that giant embezzlement scandal where hundreds of thousands of dollars got robbed.
Yeah, there were all kinds of problems up there in Siaset, and. I'm not saying you haven't had things like this happen in church history before. I mean, but
it's just that it's ironic because of the fact that even somebody like me, what you're telling me about Metropolitan Theodosius, I didn't know about. And the point is, I did news for 19 years and I missed this. And meanwhile, the Pangradius thing was so open and so out there and so in the media.
Well, remember, Pangradius.
No one talked about the Theodosius thing until 10 years ago.
So you have to remember, a person. I mean, they're both odious figures, but the difference was that Theodosius had lawyers, and he had a whole heavily powerful, a reasonably powerful organized structure that could protect him. Because obviously they don't want the OC Metropolitan going down as getting arrested for soliciting a 13-year-old boy prostitute who was an undercover police informant or whatever they call them. All right,
that's not even a rumor if there's a cop involved.
Okay, so I'm not saying the boy was a policeman, but I guess the police employed these people. Or he pretended he was 13. I'm not exactly sure.
It's a decoy.
Yeah. Okay. So they didn't want that to happen to come out. Pangratius was a wheeler and dealer. He had sort of like a used best description is sort of like a Greek used car salesman. And I'm not trying to be mean to Greeks, obviously, because we have, but he was an organizer, but his was just horrific personal life and morals.
Well, now this is an interesting point because I can touch on this. Because I can touch on this. Jonathan Britt pointed out maybe there just weren't a lot of options of synods to join with other than ROCOR in the U.S. when it happened in the late 90s. I'm sure ROAC was non-existent during that time in the U.S.
Yep.
Actually, ROAC was non-existent altogether in the 90s. It was the FROC at that point. It didn't become the ROAC until around 1998. It was the Free Russian Orthodox Church before that. But no, they had no parishes in the U.S. until 2000 and I want to say 2001. And that would have been Father Vladimir Shishkov's parish.
Now, I should just one note real quick about ROCOR. You could, if you remember, like the old church news magazines or published by the Grabe family.
Yeah, they're on the ROAC USA website.
Yeah,
like the entire.
Well, remember everything I'm saying about this person in ROCOR did. They would have said the same thing, and others would have said bad things about the Grabes. All right. And it's not like this was just as bad as it is. This was sort of like standard attacks because there were a lot of secrets among various factions of the ROCOR, just like any other larger group. All right. If you're a smaller jurisdiction, everything is sort of people know each other on a more personal basis. You're not large enough to necessarily generate major scandals because you don't have a lot of money. I think the finances is a big issue because the love of money is the root of many evils, as the apostle says.
Yeah,
and remember back in the 80s, there was the attempt to destroy Bishop Gregory because they accused his son, Father Anthony, of murdering a baby. Literally, they said he killed a baby.
I thought it was financial mismanagement. I swear, I get the version of every story.
They said no. I guess we could pull up an article.
If you can find the murdering the baby thing, that would be.
The idea was that he had an affair with a woman in the gymnasium where he was taught. This was used against Father Bishop Gregory, and that she got pregnant, and then he just killed the baby. And
straight up murdered the baby.
Yes, and then supposedly the woman came to Metron Filaret and said that this is what happened, and Metron Filaret was like, "I don't believe that Father Anthony would do that, and you must be mentally unstable," because people told him that this lady is crazy. Now she may have been crazy. I don't know the truth behind all of it. All right, I'm almost inclined to believe that probably didn't happen. All right.
Yeah,
because people have lied so much.
That's so awful. This show has taken one dark turn.
Well, this is why I don't. This is
no, it's fine. I mean, we're all grown ups here, but still, I wasn't expecting that.
But anyway, point is, I
thought it was just like it was something with the treasury.
No, it got worse, and then Father Anthony was moved to Archimandrite Anthony was moved to Palestine, and they claimed there was this. Supposedly, Metron Vitali was involved in a kidnapping plot to get rid of, and then Bishop Gregory had to fly to Palestine, to Israel, to pay the ransom, and I don't know. There was
then he was. I think he transferred to the.
What happened then is they tried to put Bishop Gregory Grabe on trial, claiming he was a Nazi and he was involved in the Holocaust.
What?
That he was, yes.
Okay,
So, do you want to hear a little bit about that?
Sure. This is very colorful.
So, because a lot of these are absurd claims, and this is how people behave.
By the way, this is how stuff in the 90s and 80s used to spread out. They would put out newsletters saying stuff like this, something ridiculous.
So, what happened is before Bishop Gregory Grabe, he was made made a reader, subdeacon, deacon, and priest within like 2 to 3 days back in 1946 by Metropolitan Seraphim Lade, right? Who's an interesting figure. Okay, but before that, before he was Bishop Gregory Grabe, after he took monastic vows in the late 70s and his wife passed away, he was proto-presbyter George Grabe. Okay,
right,
and the Grabes were an old Russian, really an old ethnic German family that had converted to Orthodoxy in the 1700s. Because remember how, like the Russian czars brought over like German technicians.
Yeah, because Father Gregory, he was nobility.
Yes, just like Meyendorff. Meyendorff is not is really an old German name. Or Elder Theodore's family, Irtel, and the other name I can't remember, Bierman or something. There were Estonians and Germans. All right. And even the imperial family, the Tsarist family, had a lot of like German blood in it. Remember this Saint Nicholas looked largely identical to the King of England. All right. So before he was Father George, he was Count George von Grabe. All right. And he was heavily involved in the post-war, like maybe white movement. You might see the post-Civil War movement with Rocor. He did cooperate with the Germans in the late 30s and 40s, and he wrote 3 books. And they were published in Belgrade, but they were also published in Germany in the 40s during the war. And I've never been able to get a copy of them, but there used to be a site that had like historical archives and it had like the old
but most of the
trial notes. Well, the stuff was the Count George Grabe, and it said that world Jewry is now going to be destroyed. It's a disaster. It is sought to destroy Europe, and by the Bolshevik menace and their capitalist lackeys in the West. And now the mighty German Reich will destroy these enemies. I mean, to be honest, when you say like, it's like someone saying we're going to destroy, our France in the war. It doesn't mean they're going to kill all the French people.
Yeah, I mean, having an opinion doesn't mean you're shoving people in, the ovens or something. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
So basically, their view was that he wasn't complicit in the Holocaust, and he had something to do with concentration camps. I almost like the nuance they used against him was like almost like he was a concentration camp commander in the 40s.
That's just dumb.
Even though most people in concentration camps, frankly, even non-revisionists, most people just died of dysentery or bad conditions, like in German cities.
That's like the whole thing with people thinking Mother Maria was martyred.
No, they made up the gas chamber stuff in Ravensbrück. That was later made up. Anyway, so
now Jonathan Britt wrote, I believe Archbishop Andrei of Roac was slandered as well. As Father Seraphin Rose said, the devil will use every opportunity to pit the true Orthodox Christians against each other, and he has. It has been.
They failed. My point, but just real quick, they failed at deposing Bishop Gregory Grabe because, frankly, yes, that going up against Bishop Gregory Grabe, even if they had Vitali on their side, even if they had all these other priests, and there were people who did not like Father George, later Bishop Gregory, like Archbishop Averki didn't like him. And people claimed Father George was involved in the suspension of St. John Maximovic, which he may have been. I don't know. All right. The problem was that people didn't like the Grabe family because they believed they had too much power, and they were essentially controlling that St. Philaret, almost like St. Philaret had no free will of his own. I mean, some of it's out of place.
Bishop Jerome Shaw of the Road Corps long accused Bishop Gregory Grabe of being his ghostwriter, which I think.
Well, remember, I mean, Bishop Jerome's opinions are right in line with people from the enemies of Bishop Gregory from the 60s. There were people who just simply didn't like him. Now, I think what is inaccurate to say is not all the enemies were just people who were like ecumenists. I mean, it would be absurd to claim Archbishop Averki was a ecumenist or something like that. If you have a church structure like Rocor, especially if it's Russian expatriates, it's going to be bad to say, but there's a lot of antagonism and bad blood among a lot of these families. All right, for various reasons. And so they failed at the deposition. I think what happened is they sort of just retired. The compromise was they retired Bishop Gregory.
Well, they retired him right around the time that...
This is like 1988, 89 when all this happened.
Yeah, but he was, I mean, with the whole thing...
I also know that Bishop Gregory had also called into question the methodology of how they went after Holy Transfiguration.
Yeah, as well. He also did not like the methodology used in receiving, entering into communion with Philly, with the Cyprianites.
Yes, and so I mean, obviously you can say, well, he was wrong in the end, but he did have valid critical points.
Well, no, his view was
because here's the problem: if you if even if you know someone's doing horrible crimes, like you know it, but you can't. But if I knew like all these terrible things were happening at this monastery, all right, and I just have enough testimonies about it, it might feel kind of vindicating to kind of railroad your way through to destroy them, if you know what I mean. But if you don't go through the sort of procedure, canonical procedure, I mean, I don't know if they didn't go through the canonical procedure, but this is the argument he made. You will end up also destroying innocent people and also setting bad precedent, because one of the other reasons they went after Hockney or pre-Hockney wasn't just because of the obviously legitimate scandals, was because they felt it was a drag on Rokor from possibly drawing closer to world orthodoxy. I think there were people even in the 80s who realized that.
I think that's part of it. I think
although Vitali's reasons for going after them were genuine, because Vitali wasn't going to go along with world orthodoxy. So you just can't say everybody who went after Hockney was secret world orthodox.
To be fair, Metropolitan Vitali wavered on that, and I've read a report that Metropolitan Vitali was actually he was disappointed because he thought with the fall of communism that he would be that there would be a possibility that he would be put in nomination for the patriarch.
Well, remember, even if that's accurate, we're now going everywhere. See, even if this is why I'm afraid to talk about these subjects. Even if that's accurate, Vitali still would have said you got to renounce Sergianism and denounce it. I mean, if the choice was between Alexius or Vitali as Patriarch of Moscow, I'd rather have Vitali.
Well, obviously, but that was never going to happen.
No, it wasn't.
Okay, so I see that Sava's back on. I want to see if I can let him on for a moment. I guess he might have a question. So let's.
All right.
Hold on a moment. Okay, Sava, you are live. Although it's going a little slow for you there. Can you hear us? Okay, I don't know if he can hear us.
Something's wrong with his audio because I can't hear him.
I don't know if his connection's right, because I can see him on like the little screen, but on the main screen itself, like his little weird logo, the little kind of swirly thing is not showing up.
Well, I'll continue just wrapping things up until obviously I probably said more than I should about things because I'm speaking of what people told me, and that's secondhand.
Yeah, but the thing is that this is an episode about fighting the memory hole, and quite frankly, most of this stuff is already deep down in
oftentimes there are things I like people will tell me who I believe are reliable that I simply won't repeat because how am I supposed to vindicate or prove them? All right. Sometimes I'll let slip up and say things like, "Oh, this guy got arrested for this," what have you. But I have no. I mean, I remember there were people in the Greek Archdiocese who came and told me about scandals that later happened, and I didn't say anything about it. I didn't want to write anything on NFTU simply because I'm like, this guy's reliable, these other guys reliable, I know that, but am I really?
Most of the time, we have to rely on actual published reports.
Yeah. Because they can say that Evangelos or whoever of this group or what have you of the Greek, he had an affair with a nun and it made the nun get an abortion or something like that. I'm like, oh, this is monstrous. But if I say that, it's like I just said it. Now it's just gossip. But if it, the problem is
that's pretty well known gossip.
Yeah, the problem is that with some of these people, it's like you meet evil. It's literally you're hearing about these like monstrously evil people, and they're more I'm more likely to believe it if it's about the Greek Archdiocese and it comes from people in the Greek Archdiocese simply because of just things I've known. But anyway, so there's Sava.
Okay, Sava, are you there?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I've missed like the last 20 minutes, so I don't know what I missed. But I wanted to ask about the miracles that are associated with Elder Theodore, because I've heard some of them, but not many.
Well, I mean, Elder Theodore's, the most recent things we have, and this was the Synod meeting we had back in, I want to say 2014 or 2016, and that Bishop John had been researching was that basically a number of residents of the area in Alaska where he was, who had been diagnosed with stages 3 and 4 cancer, had touched his. He had a standing cross that was on the desk in his cell, and apparently, when I guess people had excavated the cell and were taking care of that cross, people who had used that cross were suddenly getting better, like immediately, as in like their stage 3 cancer diagnosis would just disappear. And this happened a few times, and of course our job is to be skeptical about it and do more research, and that's what we were doing when Father John reposed. So it's stuff that there's just so much going on that we have to catch up on. But we didn't. I mean, the Synod didn't make a formal decision on the matter. But yeah, we were. I mean, there is documentation, and from what I understand, we were reviewing the medical records and talking to the doctors, who were just as surprised as everyone else. And so that is, I would say that's the most that I've heard of. I don't know if you've heard of other miracles. I know that we formerly had a priest who had been collecting those testimonies, and unfortunately, I don't know what the situation.
No, I mean he wasn't a priest under us.
Okay. And so then
but he was collecting testimonies, but he was told to stop. So
okay. So then, in that case, as you can see, even trying to get things organized in that sense, one of the issues is, of course, that to the degree that Elder Theodore would have been better known, but because of the politics even surrounding his burial, I mean, if you look at the link, it lists his place of death as 2,500 miles away from where he actually is. It's like it's kind of doing hurdles against brick walls. These are large issues. We did, there was, for a while when the Pokrov website was up, there was an accusation against Elder Theodore. And I know that we researched with, I believe it was the OCA's Diocesan Chancery to see if there was a record of any of it. And they said he had a clean record, that nothing of the sort had ever occurred when he was with the Russian Metropolia. So that's as far as we got. And so I'm sure that more can be done to promote his cultus. On our calendars, we have him for the date of repose, obviously not glorified, but to remember him in prayer until such time as more is made manifest to the church. It's unfortunately it's an involved process, and if they weren't, for lack of a better word, famous, it's in some way it's a lot harder.
You shouldn't be in a rush to glorify people. God will reveal everything in time if he so desires.
We weren't expecting any of what happened so far, so the fact that occurred is itself to us something that tells us we should keep our eyes open.
Yes, thank you for the answer. The other question I have, again, I missed like 20 minutes of the stream, so if you already went over this, it's on me for not being there. Where exactly does the autonomous Orthodox Metropolia come in with the life of Elder Theodore? And I've heard that Metropolitan John knew Elder Theodore. Is this true? Is this where the relation is?
Well, we did get... Yeah, go ahead, Vladika.
Vladika Theodore did not die in the autonomous Orthodox Metropolia. He died at the Abbey of the Holy Name, which is a monastery of our Metropolia. It joined our Metropolia about a year after he died, I believe.
Right. There was. I think it was Vladika John who said that it was Elder Theodore who had made suggestions to reach out to Noah.
I think he made suggestions that they should probably merge with like a larger group or something like that. I don't know if he knew specifically. I'd have to ask Vladika John. Vladika John knew him, yes, because he lived here from 1990 to 1996, and Vladika John was the abbot of the monastery even before it joined us. And before it joined us, it was part of something called the Synod of Orthodox Bishops of the Western Rite, which is just was a smaller Western Rite jurisdiction.
It was originally an old Catholic body that eventually began to hold to a strict to orthodoxy effectively, and that was when Archbishop Claudius Rudenko, I think he actually lived at one of the properties.
Yeah, they got reared in the 70s or something like that. But and then so he wasn't part of it. Then that's also another issue discussed is if he wasn't formally part of our synod, but do we have the right? I mean, people have raised that in the church. I mean, not in a negative way. Like, do we have the right to glorify somebody, who's not formally part of our church?
Yeah, I don't think that's. I mean, that's
Okay.
weird. I don't think it's relevant. I mean, first off, he died with us, and I don't mean us as in the church canonically, but as in us as people. Like he,
Yes, no,
John
that's
was
true.
there when he
Right.
died.
Obviously,
But now, South Padre Tony asked, did he repose the same calendar day as Blessed Philaret of New York? I'm pretty sure he did.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. So yeah, they reposed on the same day.
I think it was also near the time of Saint Theodore of Amasea, too, on the Western calendar, on the Western Orthodox calendar, because I think he was named after Saint Theodore of Amasea.
Well, I think Saint Philaret, it's easier to remember. It's a good day to just remember Elder Theodore in your prayers and continue on.
Yep.
See what happens.
Okay. So whatever happens regarding a glorification, God will reveal that in time. None of us are in any rush to bring to force anything to be about. You never want to force a glorification because you could, mistakes could be made. So, okay.
All right. Oh, did you have any other questions, Summer?
Yes, though this is another one that might be due to not catching much of the stream. I thought I heard earlier when I was trying to get microphone set up on the PC, you said that there was people that were slanderers or enemies of Elder Theodore. Usually when saints were glorified in the past, they would wait 50 years or so because these people would still be around.
Like 100, actually. That was much more common.
Yes. Who were these people and why were they so against Elder Theodore?
I think that it's not so much that they were against Elder Theodore. It's that in most cases it looked like they saw him more as a piece of property than as a person. It seems not only with the case of the New England people, but with the Rocor, that they would have probably treated Elder Theodore with so much great love and care if only he would just join them, which he didn't. And so that bothered them, and they didn't want to deal with it. Unfortunately, that's kind of, I hate to say that, but that's kind of what happened with Father Seraphim Rose to some degree as well, even though it was after his death, in the sense of what do you do with the memory? And
when he was in Alaska in the 50s, because there was the dispute about who was going to take care of the relics of Saint Herman. All right. There are people. I mean, I think there were like some of like opposing Alaskan Alawites. There were there were those who were friendly to him and those who were opposed to him, depending upon who supported who taking care of the relics. Because there was like a Father Gerasim there. There were 2 or 3 others.
Yeah, and Father Gerasim didn't want anyone near the relics.
No, and Father Gerasim's view was that he was given a special mission to take care of the relics. He didn't care what bishop sent who there. He wasn't going to let anybody interfere in it. So I think
this actually upset the people there, the natives, because his body, if I remember correctly, was supposed to stay with them.
I think the OC ended up taking the body off the island for the glorification.
Yeah.
I mean, there was something that happened around 70 that really upset them. The only slander they ever really tried to use against him that even the OCA admitted was made up was I think they claimed that he, back in like 1950 or 52 when he was in there in Alaska, he had like slept with an Alawite woman or something like that. And the reason they claimed that is a lot of the Russian priests claimed that Alawite women were notoriously loose women who just slept with everybody they could find. So
they claim a lot about them.
Yeah, so the claim was sort of, if you're a priest in an Alawite village, they were claiming, well, the only reason anybody would go there would be to sleep with the Alawite women. And how could they? It's just kind of
really
creepy.
Horrible thinking.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of. I mean, they're not. It's not the great accusation. It's not a great accusation in terms of accusations you're going to use against somebody. But nobody had said anything else after that, and it just sort of and even I think you said, Father Joseph, that when the archivist said that when he was the OC released him, the Metropolitan released him formally, I think in 1959,
and it was just on his
60,
own request. Yeah,
and they just said, there was no accusations against him or something like that. So, but anyway, I mean, people. I mean, to be honest, people said far worse things against Saint Nectarius of Aegina, and Saint John Maximovich. So, I mean, obviously, you can't go off someone saying, well, if you go live in an Alouette village and you're a priest there, then you're going to eventually fall in with the Alouette women. I mean, it's sort of weird accusation, but.
Saba notes to Jonathan, Archbishop Andrea Rourke has been slandered heavily. Yes. I mean, he's alive. He's a public figure, and I don't, we don't want to talk about him. He's alive. I would just refer it to him.
I don't know. I don't know that case. All I know about Roac is people lied about Metropolitan Valentine.
They lied. Yeah,
they lied up and down about him. And they even got to the point where they were convincing people, like in the 90s, who had been his clergy, that even with no evidence, that he must have done these things. And then they eventually used the Russian prosecutor to bring him to court. And then and the whole court case collapsed in court when the witnesses were like, well, I was told to say these things by the prosecutor, and that was the end of that. All right.
Yeah, when I was in Russia and I went to the Roac churches there, I was actually introduced to altar servers who were actually witnesses at the trial for the prosecution who had recanted. Yeah. It's just they were forced by the police to say something, and then it didn't stick. As for Archbishop Andrea's case, I don't know of anything particularly. I mean, here's the thing: the things that I do know, they're not particularly scandalous on his end. But people really want to bother him, and I feel like if I name them, they'll bother me. So I'd rather
I don't. There's no real reason to go to continue it.
Yeah, I would say just ask him.
Yes. So again, the only reason I brought up the things I brought up were things from the 80s that were well known to happen in Rocor, where people attacked Bishop Gregory Grabe and just claimed outrageous things.
They did.
I mean, and remember, Bishop Gregory's son eventually became, a bishop. Made a bishop by some of the court. He was eventually accepted, at least in retire status in Roac, and they were still attacking him when he was dying of
he could barely walk at the end of his life.
And, I mean, it was really shameful actions and behaviors that were. Because people simply did not like the Grabe family, so they felt they had to destroy even his son, even after the elder Grabe had passed away, and reposed as such. So
they went after Matich.
I mean, to be honest, if we went back into late 19th century Russia, you could probably find similar things being said. There were all kinds of accusations against the Metropolitan of St. Petersburg in the late 19th century. I don't think any of them turned out to be true. I mean, so when someone says something to you on the phone, oh, I heard this. This is I don't know why I don't like saying it unless I have I can theoretically write an article with.
Unless there's some documents.
Yeah, you have to really ask: is this really what happened, or is this an enemy making this up? Is this an exaggeration? If you continue to talk long enough, this is why maybe we shouldn't talk too long. If you can continue to talk long enough. There's always the temptation of falling into slander and libel, and especially if the person you're slandering or libel is someone you don't like, or they're part of something or some group you don't like, it's easier to believe terrible things about them. Now, again, admittedly, if someone tells me something happened in the Ecumenical Patriarchate or in the Roman Catholic Church, because I have personal experience of knowing things that happened there, I am a little bit more inclined to believe some of that stuff may be true, even without documentary evidence. All right, especially if it's a person I trust.
Who is heavily corrupted organization.
Yes. So, but if it's another case, probably not. When people come to me and they bring accusations about people, or they send emails of which they have, my first response is, okay, what's your evidence? Secondly, will you come forward, can you have can you get this person to write signed statements? And suddenly people don't want to do that. If it's that much of an issue, if it's and you're not willing to go through any of that, and especially if you're making accusation against somebody like not even part of your church or your jurisdiction, all right, you have nothing to fear from retaliation from them because you're not even part of them. You know what I mean? So anyway,
now Blind G Tech writes, this provides a lot of context. Thank you so much. Your blessings, Ladika.
thanks, glory to God, Lord bless. But
So,
that's just history. I mean, you could, if you go back and there was this Father Epiphanius who I think had been a Moscow Patriarchate monk who joined Roe Corps. Then he joined the Matthewites in the 90s, and like he hated Bishop Gregory Grabe.
is that I think I know who you're talking about,
and he's still alive. I think must be like 90 now or what have you.
Yeah,
they did not like him at all. And they were saying stuff like he was a Freemason, and here's his Freemasonic documents. And it's like
they
just
said
made
that
up
about Metropolitan of Logius too.
same old made up stuff. Like here's his free. No one had ever heard this before until like this guy came up with it. I mean, maybe he believed it. Maybe he just believed. I mean, there were enemies of people probably in the 70s accusing Father George of he's a secret Freemason. I mean, he's a weird Freemason if he's condemning ecumenism and he's kicking Freemasons out. If they find him in Roe Corps. But then of course they're going to say he's a super secret Freemason who's against Freemasons, but he's really for it. I mean, when you're going through this rigmarole, I mean, when we talk about Joachim IV or Athenagoras, let's say like Joachim IV, who died in 13, patriarch, we have documents and we do have material that we do have some legitimate material that points to him having been a Freemason. All right, and I mean, that's a little bit different a case, or Meletius Metaxas. I mean, everybody sort of acknowledges that about Meletius Metaxas, or what have you. How do you pronounce his last name? Well,
the thing is,
people get upset. People get upset about there were fights within a jurisdiction, and people are saying this or that. All this is this happened before, and it's going to happen again. All right.
We've heard this before.
Don't get upset. Don't say, well, I'm going to leave this jurisdiction on the sole basis that there are people who are behaving in ways that they shouldn't behave. If you have a doctrinal issue, that's serious. All right.
Yep. That's when it comes down to heresy.
Yes. And obviously, I mean, there may be other extreme extenuating circumstances. I mean, I can imagine if somebody had their kid go to HTM and Father Pantaleon abused them, and they left I gotta
stop. Stop this for just a moment. And I've been feeling bad about this since the debate because my opponent had said Hocknell was founded by a pedophile. As horrible as this may sound, I do want to clarify the record. Every single accusation against Father Pantaleon was by an adult. For that matter, the one case where I had heard of where somebody was under the age of 18, the accuser, the person accusing Father Pantaleon, said that Father Pantaleon told him to go away until he was an adult. So I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
No child was molested by Father Pantaleon, to my knowledge. Ever.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I'm still not. I still don't like the whole Pantaleon stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, I understand. I understand.
Then he's just a legalist.
I get it. I'm just saying he's not a pedophile.
But I mean,
because they threw that. My opponent threw that out at the debate, and I was just like, "Well, yes, he is," but that's not actually true. And I usually
speak about whenever people point out like, oh, well, the true Orthodox have these unsavory characters in their midst, like Father Pantaleon. That opens the way to where we could just point out any unsavory characters in their communion.
Oh, yes.
And then that point it's just throwing stones.
We just did earlier with Metropolitan Theodosius. I had no idea that he was
or Metropolitan Herman. I mean, everybody knows why it wasn't just financial reasons they had to put Jonah in there. All right, there was a lot of other stuff going on. Stuff went on at the seminary in Syosset, priest abusing seminarians. Syosset. That's where St. Vladimir's. There was stuff going on there that everybody knows about. That if you want to, I guess, dig into old news articles from the early 2000s, you're going to find. I mean, do they want us to bring up that one Serbian patriarch and bishop in Bosnia, who really was allowed to do stuff for like 20 years. or the head of the Serbian Patriarchate Seminary in Belgrade, who ended up having like fights with the seminarians over who was going to get what woman or what. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, we could really go into this, go into that if they want to, and that's I vaguely remember back in like the old, what's it called, the list server days of the Yahoo groups. Do you remember those, right, Father?
Yeah, I was on.
And that's how to be honest, that was how it used to be with accusations. Like, well, this Father Pentel, and then people would say, what about this guy? And it was like everybody would go back and forth, bringing up more and more unsavory characters. All right. Mm-hmm. And it got so far away from the actual doctrinal discussions. That
I hate to say this, and I'm not saying this as a slander, but some people collect this stuff. And one of those, I've mentioned him in the past, obviously negatively, was Archbishop Gregory of Colorado.
Yes.
He probably has a dossier from extending back to those Yahoo groups on everybody who was ever mentioned. So keep that in mind, that some people live for this stuff, and I'm not just
they live for recording accusations on Yahoo
and
groups.
They love the gossip. They regurgitate the gossip. It's the best part of their lives. I don't know why.
I'm sure many people are listening now just simply because they want to hear more.
Yeah, they're like, "Where's the gossip?" We know that listener number 5 is probably okay. I'm just kidding. Blind G Tech writes, "Everyone forgets things are on the internet now, and even video evidence is starting to pop up from different jurisdictions." That is absolutely true. We still haven't gotten around to it yet, but a very, very otherwise reputable website of the GOC in Greece, which has been putting up lots of actual evidence of newspapers and stuff of persecutions of the Greek localities, for some reason decided to talk about Metropolitan Evlogius of Milan. And they produced what they assumed was a Masonic certificate. And unfortunately, thanks to the age of the internet, we can see what actual Masonic certificates look like and what look like cheap photocopies made at the library. The point is, we're going to eventually.
There was also a court case over that document in the late '90s, which you can actually sue people in Europe if over libel and slander.
Yeah, but I think the bishop who accused him died.
Oh, Michelle, he died as part of the Kievan Patriarchate and such like that.
Yeah, Michel LaRoche. So you can't sue him anymore. But the point is that stuff carried, and whatever he.
I mean, we had deposed Bishop Michel of Paris because he had taken monastic vows, and his wife had taken monastic vows, and she went to a convent. But that's not what actually happened in the end. So, I mean, that was our bad. We trusted the man, and then he got upset when we said, "Look, you can't do this. You can't live with your nun wife. She has to go back to the convent if you want to be a monk." All right.
Wow.
And so
I didn't know that part. I just thought I thought he was removed because of what he did to
it's embarrassing, obviously, that we trusted this man and this happened. I mean, but look, you have to be
patriarchal extent. To be fair, kind of common.
You should simply be, nobody wants to be honest with their history, but what they want is other people to be honest with their history, because then they can use that for their advantage. All right. In other words, what you're dealing with, one of the major problems in Orthodoxy today, is the desire to use the honesty or sincerity of others against them
as a weapon.
And then when you beat them down psychologically and emotionally, then you kind of bring in the doctrinal arguments, which you knew weren't really that strong against them. They're sometimes made up, sometimes not. Then when you get them to join your group, and you join them and you discover the problems in their group, well, you're just told
that's when the whole shell game starts over, and it's like it starts
to collapse, or you go full Hakta and you're like, just do whatever the elder says.
Well, but that didn't work long term.
No, that didn't work with them. I mean, remember, we're talking
most of the 90% of the parish is left.
Yeah, we're speaking in relative historical terms. A lot of this stuff doesn't. You can't keep this stuff up if you're behaving in such ways, whether you're World Orthodox or True Orthodox. True Orthodoxy is real.
The
orthodoxy.
Truth always comes out eventually.
Yes, because if you're not a sincere person, if you're not genuine, even if you're wrong about things, but if you have this maliciousness, this negative attitude, you're going to end up destroying yourself and destroying other people.
Now, this is a very interesting point, because Blind G Tech writes, World Orthodox bishops have a major problem with sodomy and transgenderism. Now, this is a good point to make, because
I've never heard about the transgenderism stuff.
That's actually Lazar.
I mean, are they saying that there are World Orthodox bishops who are transgender?
Yeah, Lazar Pahalo in Canada said that.
Well, I don't think he himself is saying he is transgender, right?
No, he was saying that there are people who are, and we need to kind of accept them.
Yes, which is evil.
But then the point is, that
he's just degenerate every time he makes a group change. Everything like he goes crazier. So
yeah, the key here is this though, because they did so much covering up of it, it gives the impression, and I hate to say this to those who engage in sodomy, that they're okay. And what ends up happening is it's a snowball effect. Whereas you've gone from protecting one or two gay clerics, now all of a sudden you have to deal with the gay married, fashion designer guy who's rich, and now he wants to have the baby he bought baptized. And so the point
so many things wrong with that sentence. The baby he bought, gay fashion designer, rich guy controlling.
Well, that's what happened with Elpidoporus last year. I mean, it's not like
remember.
Maybe I should have said but. I don't want to.
Well, you have to also remember that this itself this right here is not God. This is public news, and Fordham is behind a lot of this. Okay, because my impression, and people can correct me if I'm incorrect here, and I'm willing to be corrected. But for a long time, the sort of liberal modernism that came out of the Fanar was sort of like a, kind of like modernism and ecumenism generated almost toward being like ecumenism with the Roman Catholic Church. It didn't really get into a lot of this, like especially in the 70s. I don't think it got into a lot of sexual depravity stuff.
That was always under the surface.
Okay, I mean, my point is that they weren't. What was it? It was under the surface, but eventually they're going to theoretically find a way to justify the behavior, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously you can have scandals in church history where people are doing things they shouldn't be doing and they're in this evil, but a lot of times they're not trying to justify themselves on a theoretical basis, like claiming adultery is good or homosexuality is.
I'm a little confused here because I guess Blind G-Tech wrote I was referring to bedroom interactions with the transgenders.
Okay,
without getting perverse or getting into any great details, I am unaware of any interactions of the sort with the transgenders.
Well, if people know about that,
if it's public knowledge, if it's visible, it's documented.
This is going straight down.
At least we're not on the murdering babies thing anymore. I'm really good, and the Nazi thing. I'm kind of we've moved up.
I guess we moved from accusing Bishop Gregory's son of murdering a baby, and Bishop Gregory himself of being the head of Auschwitz, and commanding Eisengruppen troops in Baba Yar or something like that. Which oftentimes are exaggerated claims, by the way. I mean, that stuff like that did happen, but it was more complicated since a lot of the Jews they killed, by the way, were communists. They did kill innocent people.
And we do know the Germans were not nearly as tolerant to the transgenders.
No, I mean, to be honest, if you had massacres happen, you want a side note since we mentioned about Bishop Gregory and the accusations about him being involved in like the Holocaust or narrative. A lot of the people who did shootings on the Eastern Front were Ukrainians or Belarusians who were taking vengeance upon communists.
Ukrainians, you say?
Well, Russians also.
Wait, I don't think we're allowed to say that on YouTube, I heard. I think that's actually, you can get in trouble mentioning.
I hate to interrupt, but are you referring to Vladika Gregory Grabe or Anthony Grabe?
Well, both of them. The accusation was that Vladika Gregory Grabe was that he had been involved in like killing Jews or something like that in World War II.
Basically, he said nice things about Nazis, so he was.
Pardon me? Let Sava speak.
They say that about Vladika Anthony because he fought for the Ruskaya Osvobodительная Armia during the Second World War.
Yeah, the Free Russian.
They say that about him. I've heard one or two people say, "Oh, Vladika Anthony was a Nazi," and all this other nonsense.
Well, again, the problem is that if you are, they have no evidence that he did any war crimes, but and he didn't. But the problem is that if you are a Ukrainian, Belarusian, or Russian peasant, and the Germans come through, and then the communists are kicked out of power, but all these like Communist Party people are still hanging around, and then the Germans say, "Here's guns, and we want you to help us fight at least as partisans." And of course, this was not the case of Bishop Father Anthony. He was not a partisan. He was lived in Germany, I think, until they and what have you. My point was that a lot of the accusations or people finding the local Communist Party boss who had killed their wife and and murdered a bunch of people in the village, and then just taking him out to the town square and hanging him. All right, and that somehow turns into, I guess, some massacre or something like that.
Yeah, right? Blunt G Tech writes video evidence of a Jerusalem patriarch bishop. I'm already suspicious because there have been so many accusations up until the new guy that's with the CIA. What's his name?
Theophilus.
Yeah. Up until the new guy, we've actually been on fairly good terms with the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, not us specifically, but True Orthodox in general, for a number of reasons. But the point is that because of that, they've been subjected to a lot more accusations, false accusations. So I don't know.
But the issue, but real quick, just to draw on what Sava mentioned. By the way, when the Free Russian Army was, I think it was the Free Russian Army was formed, the Russian Free Legion, I can't quite remember the name, the ROA, I think is oftentimes how you're seeing it abbreviated.
Russian Liberation Army, yeah.
Russian Liberation Army. It was General Vlasov was the commander, who had been a former Soviet general. He basically surrendered when he realized this is hopeless. And by the way, Vlasov, in fact, if they, it's a factual, it's historical that if they had listened to Vlasov, they would have won a lot more battles. The Germans would have won. Vlasov, in fact, complained that he knew all the Soviet military commanders who had not been captured. He knew how they were taught in military academies. He knew their strategies, and he would go meet with Goebbels, who was sort of receptive to him, but Goebbels didn't quite have foreign policy power. And he'd say, "Look, you can't fight this way. You have to do this." And they would, and a lot of the higher command sort of kind of ignored him. Bormann hated him because everybody hated Bormann, and Bormann's more or less, some people even accused Bormann of being like a secret Soviet agent because they were like, well, this guy was so damaged the war effort so much that he must have been. But the point is whatever someone accuses the Germans of, and oftentimes it's false, but maybe there were some, I'm sure there were some, obviously problems. If the choice is between the German army and Stalin, and you lived under Stalin, most people.
No one's choosing Stalin.
Yeah. There are going to be some people, and what did happen was during the latter part of the war, there was sort of a cooling of relations between the Russian anti-Bolshevik forces and the Germans that did in fact happen, although they still continued to cooperate. Especially I remember there were orders to destroy Prague. General Vlasov didn't agree with the destruction of Prague, so the Russian Liberation Army sort of did engage in combat operations, I think at one point against SS troops who wanted to blow up Prague. But so did, a lot of Germans didn't agree with that either. Oftentimes they're going to take a complex situation and they're going to try to paint it in Hollywood terms of, basically Gandalf versus Sauron or something like that, some fantasy.
Some battle of the ages.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas the situation was actually more complex than that. Go ahead.
With Vladika Anthony, especially from the stories of Ho from the Grabe family, he wasn't supporting Nazi ideology. He was there, but he wasn't a Nazi. That's ridiculous what these people are saying.
A lot of, remember there was the Spanish Blue Legion, which went to fight on the Eastern Front, and they weren't. To be honest, a lot of the German military didn't necessarily agree with everything the National Socialist. To be honest, that's why you have to sort of consider a lot of it to be this anti-communist alliance, if you know what I mean. All right, among 7, 8, 9, 10 different groups that had a generic view of they didn't like communism and they wanted to fight Bolshevism, and they were nationalist. All right, but within that ambit, you can have large varieties of people holding multiple different, sometimes often contradictory different ideologies with each other. All right, so again, I think Sava's right. People, they wore German uniform or whatever the Germans gave them. But that didn't mean they thought, it did not mean they agreed with Rosenberg's myth of the 20th century. Even a lot of Germans didn't like that. All right. You had even figures like, he wrote the book Hitler for 1,000 Years, the Charlemagne, head of the Charlemagne SS division, who basically he talks about how Hitler held views that were repugnant to, and this guy was Roman Catholic, and he's explained Hitler held views that were repugnant to Roman Catholicism. Hitler was a deist, and he held maybe pantheist views. And there was this mythology about Hitler somehow was like devout Trinitarian Protestant or Roman Catholic, and it's just absurd. There's no evidence for that outside of once you get out of the early 20s. But again, I mean, there is this constant attempt. Remember, also there was the 1960s. There were the ADL and this one Jewish dentist also went after like some of the Romanian expatriates who were living who had been in the Iron Guard or the Legion of Saint Michael, and they ended up expelling one Romanian. Who was the one Romanian bishop that they ended up harassing so much that he had to flee to like Portugal because they were threatening to deport him to Israel and then like hang him. All right. Valerian Trifa, I think.
Yeah, Valerian Trifa. Yeah, he ended up going to the U.S.
Well, he had to flee the U.S. and go to Portugal at one point. I think he died in Portugal because they were claiming, he was involved in the Holocaust. I mean, it's just like all these. The problem is that they had killed so many German commanders and tortured so many people to get these confessions that they still were obsessed about finding people who supposedly were involved in the Holocaust narrative. Yeah. And so they just started going after anybody they could find.
Now, Saba kind of dropped off. He said, my phone died. So
thank you. I appreciate him
for being on.
I had forgotten, or I did not know that Father Anthony had been a soldier in the Russian Liberation Army during World War II.
Now,
and so that probably is a lot of background to why you had like ADL type figures. I'm just going to guess, probably joined with some Rokor faction to go after the Graves. I mean, that probably happened.
Maybe. I mean, they had support in other groups as well.
Then again, Father George Grabe in the 70s did a series of commercials with an Orthodox Jewish rabbi in New York City, trying to a series of like public service announcements where he was like with this rabbi saying, "We're both against clerical abuse and report it to the police and what have you." And I think they also went after that to claim he was now like a Zionist, which he wasn't. It was like, whatever. I would not have done that with a rabbi simply because I have objections.
I guess it's in New York City, everyone's so close together, and the criminal element. I can understand why they did that. It was more along the lines of please don't hurt people who look.
Well, they have also now talk about memory hole. They've also tried to memory hole and whitewash things that St. Philaret said about like Zionism and Jewry.
Oh yeah, I do want to touch on this before anything else because I noticed it came up here. Blind G Tech said, "Forgive me, I did not mean to sully any relations. Just pointed to his behavior goes on anywhere." First off, we have no current relations with the Jerusalem Patriarchate. Second off, if it's newsworthy and it's relevant and it's recent, I do recommend going to nft.net, going to our website, and sending me in the information so we can research it further. But
there were all kinds of accusations like that back during the election of Patriarch Irenaeus.
Yeah.
Not against him, but against his opponent, which is why his opponent didn't win the election back in 2002 when Theodore.
Well, yeah, died. But I was talking about if it's news, then yeah, it's newsworthy. I want to hear about it, of course.
Now there have been let's be historical here. If you read Saint Raphael Hawawini's text, "The Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre," it's not flattering toward the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre. There were a lot of Orthodox people who did not like the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre. Saint Raphael Hawawini, I almost seem to recall maybe this is like that Bernstein's bear syndrome where you think you read something but you read it.
The Mandela effect.
Yeah, maybe it is. But I have read the text. But I remember reading another text which had more information. Maybe the one I read recently was like edited.
They've been doing that. They did that with Not of This World.
Well, maybe that's what happened. But there were real terrible scandals of the Jerusalem Patriarchate in Romania. Because see the thing, the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre, Saint Raphael Hawawini said the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre is like the Jesuits of the Orthodox world, except they don't have the good attributes of the Jesuits. Now that's what he said. A lot of people argue that Saint Raphael Hawawini was an Orthodox Arab who was trained by Russians at the Kazan Theological Academy, and there were tensions between the Russian Ecclesiastical mission and the Jerusalem Patriarch. This goes back to Bishop, who was the one bishop in the 1870s who was the head of the mission, I can't remember his name. If you mention it, I remember it. It was 1860s, 70s, head of the Russian Ecclesiastical mission. That the one head, he was so skeptical of the things that the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre was doing. Now, by the way, I'm saying this in the context that I think there were good Jerusalem patriarchs, so I'm not saying all of them were bad. But I mean, this is why you have people in the Russian Ecclesiastical Mission in the 1860s that were saying things like, maybe the JP is faking the Holy Fire because there's so many scandals going on.
I've heard. Yeah,
now the difference, of course, is that if you read the context, what's happening is that he's just believing whatever bad things people are saying against him, because he is so. This is the context that people don't bring up. He's so jaded against them because he viewed them as the Greek hierarchy as treating the Arab Orthodox so terribly that he simply did not have any respect for them. The problem is that we have there was the Jerusalem Patriarch Bishop of Jerusalem Patriarch back in the 1790s, who there were people who went into the sepulchre with him when he prayed for the Holy Fire, like Russians and others and witnesses, and they saw the Holy Fire come down. It was unambiguous. It wasn't some secret candle behind a secret chamber, that kind of stuff. All right, it was they saw the fire descend from the sky. All right, when
That's
it happened.
Still what happens.
I'm saying that, but I'm saying that oftentimes the people who bring the accusation against it, they'll bring up this one Russian bishop from the 1860s, and they'll omit the fact that, he simply he didn't like anything about them. Saint Raphael never denied the Holy Fire, as far as I know. Saint Raphael Howini never claimed it wasn't happening. He just believed that the people running the Jerusalem Patriarchate were not respecting the native Orthodox population of the country.
This was a common thing back then. That you have to remember that there was an entire struggle in the late 19th century.
Porphyrius Uspensky was the head of the Russian Ecclesiastical Mission and later bishop who said these things. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and basically that he had to that they basically were the local people were accusing the Brotherhood of making sure that there were no Arab bishops.
Yes.
This was actually part of the
Arabs
reason.
weren't allowed to be also Arab up until like the 1940s. Arabs weren't allowed, or 20s. Arabs weren't even allowed to be monks in monasteries in Jerusalem Patriarch. They couldn't be servants at the monastery even.
Well, it's worth noting that even in the 19th century, many of the bishops of the Antiochian Patriarchate were also Greeks. And
that was the attempt by the Brotherhood to take over Saint Raphael talks about that in that book.
Yeah,
there was this major attempt to simply completely take over the Antiochian Patriarchate, and the claim the Brotherhood made was that the Arabs don't really. The Melkite schism happened because Arabs ran the Patriarchate. Therefore, if Greeks run it, everything's going to be fine. That's essentially what it was. And they were narrowly defeated from taking complete control of the Patriarchate in the late 1890s. And what happened in the end? In the end, both the Ecumenical Patriarchate, totally run by Greeks, and the Antiochians, totally run by Arabs, they went the same route, didn't they, Father Joseph, into ecumenism?
Yeah, I mean,
so the claim that, it's if only Greeks had run Antioch, it wouldn't be. Well, Greeks run the Phanar, so how did that turn out for them?
Yeah.
Right. This is the problem when there are legitimate aspirations and defenses of people being Greeks and Arabs, and they can like their society and culture and what have you. But if you start exalting your one ethnic group to this status of the master race in the church, that's essentially how some of them almost viewed it. Like St. Patriarch Bartholomew saying that Hellenic ethnos or Hellenic philos, which is almost like a stronger term, the Hellenic race, his view is that has the primacy in the church, like it's a divine right, almost like the Hebrews in the Old Testament have like this primacy in the Old Testament church. All right, well now it's like the Hellenic race, according to Bartholomew, has the primacy. And he'll say he's not racist; he just believes the Hellenes should run the church. All right.
Okay.
Well,
I was gonna. First off, we're starting to get other questions and comments. Anonymous Jones mentions that he can't super chat. Need more subs or whatever. Basically, you can always support us on Subscribestar or Odyssey. I'm trying to get the Streamlabs stuff set up, and I'm still not quite sure how to do it. And it looks like there's a lot more costs associated. If you do want to support us, you can go to either nftu.net or our YouTube page for links to Subscribestar or Odyssey. On nftu.net, you can also reach out to us on GabPay, on Cash App, PayPal. I mentioned this. I think I should probably talk a little bit about this. As you can see, I've been a little more active over the past few days. And the reason for that, and I'm going to be a lot more active on this channel. Well, I am, or said, yes, South Padre Tony says, or send them Monero. I do have a Monero address. I'm going to start putting up crypto links as well on nftu.net. I don't have a secular job anymore as of Friday.
Why not?
I'd rather not get into it. But
you don't want to talk about it. I mean,
yeah, I don't want to talk about that. I mean,
which is an interesting reason. It's an interesting subject, nevertheless.
Yeah, well, the point is, over the past month and a half, if you remember my appeal of last month, I basically was making the argument that I wanted to make this kind of my full-time work. Now it kind of is. So anything you want to send, you can. You can either go to our YouTube page right now. If you join our Subscribe Star or Odyssey, I am going to start doing subscriber and supporter only calls on on Odyssey around the 15th of each month. We're still going to be doing live call-ins. We're doing book reviews on Thursdays. If any of you have seen yesterday's short, I'm going to be doing shorts with explanatory shorts on True Orthodoxy. That was just the first of a few that we're going to go through. And South Padre Tony he sent me Monero. I will say in Monero's defense, to my XRP is Ripple. That's a different one. Monero is secure crypto. One of the things that has been a concern in the crypto community, not that we're like big crypto people or anything, but has been the rise of quantum computing. There is the fear that a sufficiently strong quantum computer could break everyone's addresses. As my understanding is, Monero, the people behind Monero are so obsessed with security that they're already trying to work around that problem now. It's a very fast currency. It works very well. I was originally a Litecoin user, but I like Monero. I'll be honest. South Padre Tony's Monero was the first Monero I ever got, but it's really easy to use and it just pops right up there. It's fast. But yeah, as we get more and more socially unstable, as the dollar becomes worth less and less, what I found, I hate to say this, is because there's a division in my house. Should we start with precious metals? Do we go with crypto? I think both of those things are good, but I think growing vegetables is also good, because the first thing people can't get when money stops being worth something is food. So
beehives.
If you can, that takes a lot more work. And you think what you were going to do?
I got to go through classes to get registration in New Jersey.
Yeah, so we're not there yet, but food is easy enough. So any support anyone wants to give, the links are in our YouTube, or just go to our website at nftu.net. Or if you want to send crypto, reach out to me on Twitter or on Gab, and I will get you the necessary addresses until I can put up those funky little QR codes on the website. Okay, so now here we're going to get to some questions. Also, one question I didn't get to ask. Some are pointing to Elder Theodore as an example of a true Orthodox saint. What specifically did he say against ecumenism and the new calendar? I don't know. You have to realize, when Elder Theodore reposed in 96, the new calendar in the OCA was only like 14 years old. And he wasn't in the OCA. He was off in Mexico.
Well, I can tell you from what Vladika John tells, he did not like the Roman Catholic Church whatsoever.
Okay.
And he did not have a positive view about joint prayers or anything. I mean, that he did ask him about it. It wasn't like, remember, even before Vladika John joined our metropolia, it wasn't like, he was anti-ecumenist. All right. So It wasn't like he didn't ask Vladika Theodore or Elder Theodore these questions. He didn't like any of that.
Right, they were in essence.
Because you have to remember, if you're a monk from like that old time and you're trained to Valam and he taught. I think he taught like he did teach and he did. Now this is the other interesting thing about Elder Theodore. He for a brief time in the 30s taught at Saint Sergius Institute in Paris. Why was it for a brief time? Because he taught because he considered a lot of the other professors there that they didn't understand orthodoxy or they held modernist views. All right. He taught hagiography, or the lives of the saints. That was basically what he taught. I don't know if they still have that course anymore. They may have gotten rid of it by the
probably not. They probably replaced
because
it.
Vladika Theodore's view was that if it says the saint said this and these miracles happened, it happened. I mean, he wasn't into this idea of of deconstructing, saying, oh well, history. Like for example, I have a like if you ever buy translations of early medieval texts, Benedictine texts, which are pre-schism, you can find these from the 700s and such. Lives of the Saints and what have you. They're done by this modern organization or a Roman Catholic group called Cistercian Studies, Center for Cistercian Studies.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they do good translation. I'm not saying that. But if the notes are horrible at the bottom of the page, horrific, they'll say Saint Benedict never existed, or there were 3 or 4 Saint Benedicts, and who knows which one was it. I mean, that destroy, even if you claim to be a Cistercian, which technically claims to be the sons of Saint Benedict, children, I mean, like monastic sons, they destroyed their own order by claiming that. So Elder Theodore's view was that things like modernism, and I think he would have considered there were other Russians who considered ecumenism to be like essentially a subset of modernism. All right, that it was evil. It was not of God. It was satanic. So that's I don't know what else to say about that. In regards to the calendar, I don't think he ever served anywhere on the new calendar. I can say that almost 100% certainty. Because even when he served in like the Metropolia in the 50s and 60s, maybe up into the 70 or maybe 68 or something, I can't remember. They were not using the. They were not using. I mean, when did the Metropolia? When did the OC adopt the new calendar? 1979 or something like that. Hello, Father.
They in the OCA 1982.
1982. Okay, and then of course even Alaska and the Diocese of the West never adopted it, which is they never bothered to tell anybody about that, huh? So, he would not have had positive view. He did not have positive views about these things. Now, what is true, and what some people tried to use against him, was somebody asked him, was Patriarch Alexei II a Bolshevik? Was he like an atheist, secret Bolshevik who didn't believe? And Elder Theodore said that he did not believe Patriarch Alexei was really a Bolshevik. They didn't necessarily agree what he did, but he didn't believe he was really a Bolshevik. All right. I don't really see how you can make a lot out of that. I mean, if somebody asked me if I thought Patriarch Alexei II, if someone asked me if I thought Patriarch Sergius was a Bolshevik, I'd say no. I'd say he just went along to get along, which is what made it so much more terrible. All right. If somebody goes along to get, if someone asked me if Athenagoras was a Freemason, I'd say yes. Or Romanius Pataxius. Although Bartholomew denies that he's a Freemason, by the way, or at least no, his agents deny he's a Freemason. He himself has never denied he's a Freemason. So,
all right.
I think that does answer the question. From what I've read, he was never on friendly terms with any kind of ecumenical movement or any of that, and he never was really able to even be associated and really with those types of people. All right.
I think that's a pretty complete answer there. Jonathan Britt asks, can you explain more of what his memory hold from Not of This World? I would suggest there's a site called Orthodox Australia. I want to get to it, which actually has an original edition of Not of This World, where you can see that they've changed a lot of the ending, a lot of the stuff that Father Seraphim was against, and some of the biographical information of Archbishop Anthony has largely been removed because of.
Although, by the way, just real quick, there were people who tried to accuse Elder Theodore of being like this rabid anti-Semite, which I don't know exactly what that means in the Russian context, because there was a Jewish man who he baptized, who converted to Orthodoxy, but he had been previously but this Jewish guy had also, before he got baptized, this is back in like the late 70s, 80s, had previously like been involved with like the Hare Krishna, all right, and so he converted to Orthodoxy. Vladika baptized him, and then Vladika Theodore took him to a restaurant in Mexico, okay, or I think it was in Texas or something. And he had this man, this like newly baptized guy, he had him order a ham steak, all right. And his idea was that we're gonna make sure 2 birds are killed with 1 stone, okay. Hare Krishna believe in veganism because they believe in transmigration of the souls, okay. Mm-hmm. And Jews don't eat ham. All right. Yeah. So he said, I want you to eat this ham steak as an act of obedience. And the guy ate it. So I mean, I don't know how that's anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that's not anti-Semitic.
That's kind of
Actually,
crazy.
well, that's actually a very common thing because especially with people, I know Metropolitan Valentine of Roac, when dealing with people who are pretending to be quasi-monastics, would make them eat meat just to test them. That's actually far more common.
What do you mean? What do you mean quasi-monastics? What do you mean?
People who are not actually legitimate monastics pretending to be monastics, and then they'd confront them and he'd be like, okay, well, you're not a monastic. So they'd be like, oh, yeah, okay. So they'd be like, okay, well, here's some meat. And
would they eat it or they not eat it?
From what I understood, they ate it, but they were, at least in some
Well,
cases, they were mad about it. But
yeah.
in any case,
well, I'm confused. If they claim to be monastics, why didn't they just refuse to eat the meat?
Here's the problem. The problem is this: monastics, as you know, are under obedience.
Yes.
These people were not under obedience to a monastery, so they were just.
I understand. I'm just thinking if somebody came to Metropolitan Valentine was like trying to pretend they were a monastic, it seemed like the best way to pretend you're a monastic.
No, they didn't dress up like a monastic or anything. They were pretending to be like monastics in the world.
But wouldn't the best way to try to make that pretension be to adopt a diet of a monastic?
Right, but then that puts you in direct disobedience to the Metropolitan.
Okay. All right. Okay, I understand.
Yeah, it's a self-will thing.
Yeah.
Yes. So that and that's I think what Elder Theodore was going for. St. Raphael of Brooklyn and the Ecclesia of Vitae labored much against Hellenizers in Lebanon, where he slandered and was denounced as an Arab nationalist. I have heard that.
See, exactly. I mean, if you were a Syrian Arab or a Palestinian, and by the way, when you actually talk about Syrian Arabs or the Palestinian Orthodox population that's remaining, a lot we call them Arabs, by the way, but they're really actually Syriac Orthodox people, Chalcedonian Syriac people who were Arabicized. By the way, that's like
they're ethnically the same people.
They're ethnically the same people as, for example, Assyrians. If you want to look, when we say Arab, like they call Egyptians Arabs. Yeah. Although like 80% of Egyptian DNA is or 80 to 90% is like ancient Egyptian with Greek or something like that.
It's the same thing with the Lebanese. If you ask them are they Arab, they'll say no, I'm Lebanese.
Yeah, but they speak Arabic. But that's how they're defining it. Arabic, Islam came in a Arabization, so everybody was sort of Arabicized. All right, and it'd be almost like calling I guess like imagine if we simply called everybody from everybody from Mexicans to Dominican Spaniards or something like that. I mean, we do call them Hispanic, I guess. All right, so there is that general concept of like a linguistic, cultural.
Right, but that's my point: is that a Peruvian is not an Argentine, and an Argentine's not a Mexican.
Although they may speak Spanish and they have a sort of a commonality and some cultural commonalities. Or have
some, but not much. I was even talking about that with my wife earlier. The Mexican level of spice is way higher than say Puerto Ricans, and to me, it's higher than everyone because putting spice on putting like hot pepper on like dried mango doesn't sound like an ideal snack to me, but I did see lots of little Mexican kids eating it. They love it, and I'm not attacking it. I'm sure if that's your culture, you like that. I myself cannot handle that much. I can handle it on fish, but I can't handle it on a mango, man. I just want the sugar.
But to finish real quick up with St. Raphael Holwini, I recommend people do read his texts because it does contain useful information. I think he was being completely sincere. I don't think he was. I know he was not making things up. St. Raphael again. St. Raphael's point was that the Jerusalem Patriarch the Church of Jerusalem up into the 1550s had not been run for well over 1,000 years, even before the era of conquest, had not been run by we might think of ethnic Greeks. Okay, they were Syrians. With Islam, Arabization did come in. So you did have people who you might call were Arab patriarchs in the 12th and 13th century because they were Syrians who had adopted Arabization. Yeah. Although remember, Syriac, the classical Syriac language, was used in the not just the Hagiopol. So, for example, before Jerusalem was Byzantinized to formally accept the Typicon of the Great Church in the late medieval period, they used what was called the Hagiopolite Rite. Sometimes people call it the Rite of St. James. All right. Which would have been famous like the Liturgy of St. James, but they had other service books too, like their own Euchologians and baptismal services. Although people should not exaggerate, because when you start comparing like the various legitimate ancient, like Alexandrian rite, Hagiopolite rite, Hagiopolite rite was related to the ancient Antiochian rite, to the Byzantine rite. There's a massive amount of overlap. Like, it's like comparing, if I were to take like various texts and prayers for baptism and what have you, and other services from the Mozarabic, Gallican, and Western Roman rite, there'd be like probably 60% or so overlap. You'd actually have a lot of commonality, and it's very difficult to determine who got what from first. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was actually similar, like for example, the Coptic Church, the Coptic Monophysites, they preserved, and even the Orthodox Alexandrian rite, which Saint Nectarius kind of revived in the 19th century. They both had kneeling, the prayers, maybe at different places, but they both had the prayers of Saint Basil that he composed for kneeling vespers on Pentecost. Okay, all right, and that's because, even though St. Basil was up in Cappadocia, some of this stuff spread, all right?
Yeah.
So the point is that for a long time, things in Jerusalem were done like a lot of in Greek and Syrian, all right, even though they were Orthodox. I mean, oftentimes we think of Syriac language as either the Nestorians or using it, or the Monophysites, but Syriac was the lingua franca of the Middle East outside of like the Antioch and maybe some other places under the, it was a common language the regular people used until Arabic came. Although, so anyway, my point was that it was only in the 16th, 17th century that it was sort of, you can either argue a re-Hellenization or a new Hellenization came liturgically,
Right.
and this gradually created more. I mean, there were even attempts to prevent the Arab Orthodox from celebrating in Arabic. I mean, there were significant problems that transpired, and at one point there was a Jerusalem Patriarchate Metropolitan who basically said he told like various Arab villages, just join the Union. So I don't want to deal with you anymore.
Wow.
And he was. It's like, was he a heretic? I think it was less a heretic in that he was just a bad guy. He didn't. I mean, maybe he was a secret heretic. I mean, because how do you?
Well, in that period, that's when the period when there was the Union in 1724.
Right. So. I think he told him what he said is that, look, if you don't like the way I'm doing it, just join the Protestants, Roman Catholics. I don't care for Arabs. All right.
Oh wow, that's terrible.
And so what happened is the Russian, like here's the real history. The Russian Orthodox Church in the 19th century saved the Palestinian Orthodox people from just simply being destroyed and absorbed into Protestantism, Latin Rite, Roman Catholicism, or Unitism. They single-handedly stopped that from happening. The Russian Ecclesiastical Mission had books printed in Arabic. The czars paid for it. If it had not been for the czars, it would have been a far worse situation for many Orthodox people in the Middle East, not just Greeks. I'm not just entirely attacking Greeks, because there were Orthodox Greek people who didn't agree with all this stuff. I mean, obviously,
yeah.
And to some extent, you can say that there was a Phanariot oligarchy that came to power. That, remember, true Orthodox in Greece, we didn't like the Phanar too. All right, so it wasn't. There were other things going on. But it's often forgotten, and the rush to accuse the czars of Caesaropapism, the imaginary heresy that they always like to invent when they want to attack Russia. If it had not been for the Orthodox czars, probably half of the Orthodox population would have been destroyed, either by the Muslims just simply forcing them, killing them, driving them out, and the other half would have been Roman Catholicism and Protestantism just simply forcing them into the Unia. It would just went absolutely terrible. I mean, the czars had paid with their own dime books, massive amounts of books to be printed for Orthodox Arabs, also for Orthodox Greeks, by the way. The czars paid for a massive amount of the Eastern Patriarchs to be kept afloat. All right, and a lot of times, some of these, like the Phanar, complained about this, but did they want the czar to stop paying for it? Well, see, this is the problem. If the czar pays for 80% of your income, or 50% of your income, or more, even. I mean, if they're the ones protecting you and you don't like it, well, why don't they like it? Because they didn't like the idea that the czar is the claimant to the Roman emperor.
Now, right? on the topic of money, Sava says collect silver coins. Just a random tip out there. Reichsmarks are a good, easy start for silver. There are a number of ways. Junk silver is another advantage. There was a mention of Ripple. I should mention that's a bank-sponsored crypto, and even though they got out of this court case recently, I think it's all a psyop, and personally, I don't trust XRP at all. Anonymous Jones says, we're talking crypto and Mandela effect. What do you all think of the Book of Enoch? What does it mean to the Orthodox Church?
Years ago, when our father Brendan was still on Earth, was alive before he reposed, I was originally Father Augustine when I took my first vows.
Yeah, Brother Augustine and then Father Augustine.
Yeah, I was my baptismal name was Nathaniel, by the way.
Yes, I remember.
You remember? Okay, you remember when I was just Nathaniel? All right.
Yes.
I was a lot younger and a lot thinner. So,
yes, yeah, me too.
Exactly. So a lot thinner. Okay. Anyway, to my shame. Okay. So, Father Brendan, the reason the reason I took the name Enoch was because Father Brendan had a devotion to the prophet Elias. Now, Father Brendan had a lot of health problems. He had Parkinson's. He had the medicines he had taken for years had terrible psychological effects on his mind. Like, he didn't even know. Sometimes, half the time, he wasn't quite sure where he was. He would maybe go back to think it was 1984, but he was still lucid for maybe about a fourth of the time. Okay, and he was and so you could have conversations with him, and he'd trail off after about an hour and a half. He'd sort of start, going off and what have you. So he would often drink Coca-Cola for the sugar and for caffeine. All right. So I would sit in Father Brendan's room. I'd bring him a case of Coca-Cola. He would sort of be bed bound, be in his bed, and he'd have his Bible and he'd have some other books. And I say, okay, Father, what will we talk about today? I'd help him clean up his room and a few other things, and what have you. And so he would drink a whole case of Coca-Cola. And even though he had taken all these different medicines for his, various 17 different medicines for his ailments, the caffeine and the sugar would sort of bring him back, if you know what I mean, to sort of a more cognizant level. That's the background. And so he had a book about the Old Testament pseudepigrapha. All right. It's here somewhere. It's sort of this large, thick 2 volumes or something. And we read through part of the Book of Enoch. And we kind of stopped. I think we may have gone through the entirety, maybe stopped halfway through, because it got to be almost like Father Brendan described at a certain point as it sounded like the ancient Hebrew bibliological report or something like that. Because it was talking about various different winds coming out of heaven. And that was the least interesting parts of it. But we also studied, we also had an idea of, where are the mentions of the book of the prophet Elias and Enoch? And why Enoch? Because Prophet Enoch, the whole Saint Enoch, my patron, is always mentioned in a lot of patristic and even biblical texts, if you include the full canon. Okay, if you only include the very short Masoretic canon, you're going to have only one or two references to Enoch, which are 3 references, which is what Genesis, Book of Jude. I think he's mentioned in Book of Hebrews, I believe. Right, he's translated by God. Okay? Yeah. But in the Book of Wisdom of Ecclesiasticus, and I think in Wisdom of Solomon, the prophet Enoch is mentioned with the prophet Elias. It's mentioned that the prophet Enoch will be returned and give repentance to the nations. The patristic interpretation. Now we believe the mention of the 2 witnesses in the Book of Revelation are reference to prophets Enoch and Elias, because both those prophets have not undergone physical death. And St. Paul in Hebrews says it is appointed to man once to die, and then the judgment. Now, of course, someone can always come back and say, well, aren't there people who died, got buried, their bodies decayed, and God raised them from the dead, like Lazarus? Yes, but general, that's the exception that proves the rule. I can think of St. Taxiotes. Is it St. Taxiotes, the soldier from
the Carthage? 7 sleepers of Ephesus?
Well, the 7 sleepers never really died. They just went to sleep, actually. They didn't undergo physical death.
That's true. Okay.
St. Taxiotes of Carthage was a soldier who, just a little background, because this involves the toll houses also, by the way, but I won't get into that. St. Taxiotes was a soldier, I believe, maybe a government official, and he sort of moved to the countryside with his wife, but he ended up committing adultery with a farmer's wife, and he died before he repented, so he got buried and he went to hell, okay, because he died in unrepentant sin. And the angel, anyway, he for about 3 or 4 days after he died, people heard him yelling from the grave, okay. And when they buried him, he was already, he was dead. He wasn't his body was, your body, without a lot of modern technology, a dead body will begin to decompose sometimes within a few hours.
The rigor mortis will be very quick, yeah.
So he was dead. This was not a case of, obviously, the daughter of the Jairus and the son of the widow of Nain, they were dead. But you can imagine how people at the time could try to accuse Christ of, well, it just looked like they were dead, But you can't, obviously, that was why when Lazarus was raised from the dead, he was dead 4 days, and his body stinketh, as the Scripture says. All right, there was really no way anybody could. And it says in Gospel John says even many of the Jews believed, and Jews are generally used as a negative term in the Gospel of John. So when it says they believed, it meant that this is a miracle. Anyway, so appointed man once to die, then the judgment. That's the general rule. So the prophet Enoch was translated to the paradise. St. Elias was taken up and taken there as well. And so we studied that. We studied the references. We did go through parts of the book of Enoch. I think I may have maybe read it, maybe finished it privately. It was just, there was also the second and third Enoch, and I've not gone through those again. But what's the view of the church of the book of Enoch? The church does not accept it as canonical. It doesn't accept it as quote unquote deuterocanonical. The problem is that there are various references in the book of Enoch, from I remember reading it, that talk about fallen angels. There was a fall of there were angels that decided to take women as wives and procreate children from them, and that's the whole interpretation of what happened in Genesis 6. Okay, and you're familiar with that, right, Father? Of course.
The old Nephilim and
yes, Nephilim. The problem is that although you can find some church fathers that held that view, the majority and the consensus of the fathers was against it. And it was against it because there are theological and how does an immaterial angel
get a woman pregnant?
Secondly, where does the soul come from? All right. Who is that's a larger question, but that's especially acute there, because if these are demons, if you're saying, well, they're demons now, and the demons are having getting women pregnant because they're
demon people.
So they're half demon, half human people. Or is the soul inherently evil? Is it not inherently evil? I mean, demons technically are not in their essence evil. They're evil because of their will is bent. Their will is perpetually bent against God, because God made everything good. In essence, that God makes cannot turn into evil. You know what I mean? All right. But demons, they're evil because their will is crystallized away from the Lord. All right. So there were all these questions that people raise. And the other fact is you do have some figures that were part of the church and left it, like Tertullian. I mean, he was part of the church. He left it. I mean, I guess you could mention him. He kind of thought maybe the book of Enoch was canonical and had been preserved from the flood, although no one really, that wasn't an acceptable position for the majority of fathers. St. Augustine, I believe, did know about the book of Enoch. There were translations. People did read text of it. But if you start reading it, it does get weirder and weirder. Okay.
Now, there's more questions, and I want to jump to this one real quick because I hate to say this. Which donation method gives you the most money? PayPal, Gab, or the other one? Gab and Cash App basically are the cheapest, as well as doing crypto. For the record, although I said it was personal, I will clarify I did not quit my job. I was fired. Okay. Getting to the next question we have here. The Earth, is it flat or globe? Is there a bunch of Orthodox amongst monastics who hold an Old Testament view of cosmology with hell under us and firmament above us, not outer space all around us? And that's kind of presupposing.
Okay, so obviously it presupposes of the Old Testament that the only acceptable interpretation is a flat Earth interpretation. Yeah. Now, I will say this, and I will correct myself from something I said years and years ago, and obviously we're always going to be wrong about things, and as we realize it. I don't think believing in a flat Earth is a heresy. I think the majority of the fathers did not hold it. All right. But
yeah, it's really more of the realm of science.
I think the problem is that some of it is. Do you mean, for example? If I'm mistaken, if it is a heresy to hold flat Earth,
I've never heard of a heresy.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it is. I just the problem I've encountered is you have like Saint Bede, for example. All right, Saint Bede says the Earth is an orb, and that it is the shape. It is like an apple or an orange or something like that. Okay.
That's pretty round.
Now, if you read obviously he did. Now there is some debate about whether St. John Chrysostom believed the Earth was flat. or was round. It does seem there are some texts where he gives various opinions, but he didn't seem to think it was a big deal. All right.
Well, yeah, and this is, I think that one thing we should bring up is that the modern origin of the flat Earth debate did not stem from within the Orthodox Church. It stemmed from outside of it, and it was a question that originally was not even a religious one, but it was a secular question in the 18th century that eventually made its way into Protestantism. That's what part of the reason.
Now, Saint Isidore of Seville, by the way, there is debate about when you read his etymologies and book 2 or 3 about whether he is describing a flat Earth. When they say flat Earth, by the way, they don't mean the Earth is a two-dimensional object. They mean it's sort of like a disc, a round disc.
Yeah, a round disc that you
like
can
a circular
travel
disc
around.
or something like that.
That the Antarctica is the edge of the firmament as opposed to.
And the reason is that if you look at a lot of early medieval maps and some maps from late antiquity, okay, that we have recovered, because a lot of manuscripts that are like you can find a manuscript from like 600 that's written in, that was copied in a monastery, and they will be copying, let's say, a Latin geographical work composed in 50 BC, and they'll copy the illustrations also. That's why those are so useful. All right, and they will show the Earth looking like it's a circle, okay, and Jerusalem is like at the center. Well, maybe not, and at least the Christian ones. Well, sometimes the Latin ones do, but the pre-Christian ones too. And it'll look like the continents, almost as like it's almost looking like the Middle East or the Near East or the Eastern Mediterranean is the center of the world, okay, on the map, all right? And you have like the continents coming out from them, all right?
So it's like a neoconservative map of the Earth.
I suppose.
Sorry,
I suppose you could say that, but I don't think they have the same intention. I mean, but and so. So you had like there is some debate about whether Saint Isidore believed the Earth was an orb or was flat. There's this whole debate about the antipodes. Okay, how to interpret the description about the antipodes. Now, what are the antipodes? Antipodes are the other side of the Earth. Okay, for example, the ancient geographers. And this is before even the church, the New Testament church in the New Testament was founded. Ancient and geographers believed in what was called the torrential zone. All right, that is, they were ancient geographers like Plato and Aristotle. I mean, I guess you call Aristotle a geographer. He did indulge in that. They did believe in a round Earth. Okay, and this is just a related subject to the whole flat Earth discussion. Okay, and I have no problem discussing this because to me, it's I don't get upset about it. Why would I get upset about somebody said, well, I believe they're why am I going to get angry at somebody for that? It'd be stupid to. All right, but so ancient geographers who the classical Greek view of the round Earth. Now the Epicureans, by the way, and the atomists, they did not believe in a round Earth. All right, which goes against the modern atheist position where they try to want to make Epicurus and Democritus and Lucretius the Latin atomists who believe in the flat Earth. They want to make them like these paragons of scientific investigation, where when they believe these things that are embarrassing from the perspective of modern atheists. So they would have said the ancient globular or spheroid Earth proponents, you might say, that there was a torrential zone. The torrential zone was basically what we call the equator, but a lot bigger than it, okay? Because they reasoned that, look, the further north you go, what happens? It gets colder, right? Okay? The further south you go, it starts to get hot. You start to go into Egypt, it gets warm, really warm. You start to go into southern Egypt, it gets hotter. To go into Sudan and then the Ethiopia, it's hot as well. So the Greek geographer said, well, this makes sense. This probably means it's going to get to be like 150 like what we would think of like 150, like boiling water temperatures for several hundred miles. Therefore, nobody lives in the South Pole. All right. That was their conclusion. This became a continuously debated point because the authority of the classical Greek geographers was so strong. And it wasn't just Christians who believed that. People thought, Aristotle and these Greek guys are geniuses, and they were very intelligent men, all right? And they were like universal savants, and whatever they said must more than likely be true. So people just said, well, the Greeks said it, it must be true, all right? I know that's simplifying it. So there was, in fact, a discussion about are people living on the antipodes. So, I mean, there is some evidence that there were some Eastern Church figures like He was the friend of St. John Chrysostom, and then he later became the enemy of St. Chrysostom, but he never died outside the church. Severian of Gabala, I believe. And in fact, some of his homilies were later attributed to St. Chrysostom because he had a very similar preaching style. Severian of Gabala has this series of homilies where he mocks the round earth as being, for example, that he did say it doesn't make any sense, it's against the biblical record. His view was that the world is sort of kind of a flat disc in the sense we're describing it, okay? And you have a dome, all right? And then you have underneath it, all right? And there's maybe there's some sort of waters above and below the dome, okay?
Right.
I can't quite remember, all right? There were other church fathers who did not interpret it that way. Some of them did believe that references in the Old Testament had to be interpreted in the terms of perspective, if you know what I mean. Okay?
Right.
So you're gonna, if for example, if I say I saw the sun setting over the hill, okay, and I'm living on, and then someone says, when did it happen? Well, I saw the sun set at 6:20 in the afternoon. And they say, well, that's not true. I saw it set at 6:25. Well, the reason being is we're at different elevations. I mean, there's different hills. There's geographies different. You know what I'm trying to say? Even if we're at the same latitude and longitude and what have you,
yeah,
we can see the sun go underneath a different objects at different time, and it may be dark at different times for us, or something like that. All right. So that's a matter of perspective. There were a lot of fathers who thought we have to that these are accurate descriptions in as far as they are describing the events that they saw. All right. Were there, I'm sure there were many Christians who thought, like Severian of Gabala, that the earth was flat. Before people begin to attack Christians for that, I mean, Anonymous Jones may be like, well, the Severian's right. Okay, maybe that's his view. I should also point out that if you had gone to a 2nd century materialist atheist, essentially a material atheist almost, Lucretius, all right, who I've seen all these materialists and atheists bring him up, he believed in a flat earth.
I
So
want to clarify here, because I do want to clarify here, because you have mentioned quite a number of fathers with different positions. Again, there is no official position of the church on whether the earth is flat or not. It is not something that has.
No, I will say this. I will say that there is a predominant opinion when you get to the medieval period among you might see more educated fathers of the round earth. All right, because and you have,
but they never declared it was a heresy.
I don't think they ever. I think if some bard said, "Well, I believe the earth is flat." Well, I can't imagine Saint Bede saying, "You can't take communion now."
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
That would not be how it. He'd try to. He might talk to you a little bit, and maybe he'd say, "Well, look, it's not really worth getting in that 10-hour discussion with this guy. Here's my reasons. If you don't accept them, okay, you're still a monk of the monastery, and you're still a Christian.
You wouldn't. You're not gonna,
there would be no reason to attack those people if we're believing that.
Yeah,
and so now the part of the rationale that I think against it, you could argue from a church perspective without going into the dogmatic field, would be that when kings are consecrated and emperors are consecrated, they're handed a globe with a cross on top. All right. Have you ever seen those before, Father?
Yeah, the orb. Yeah.
Yes, and that represents Christ conquers
ruling the world.
Exactly. Now, the argument I have seen against saying that is a reference to the round earth. What I have read is the view that that's simply describing the mundus or the cosmos. Mundus, by the way, is the Latin equivalent. We often translate it as world, almost like we're talking about the earth itself. But it's actually the Latin equivalent of cosmos, or the universe. Okay, so there's almost the view that that's really a description of the cosmos is almost like is represented as a sphere, and the cross is on top, and Christ is king of the universe, or something like that. There are some who say that's not quite accurate. That's really reference to the earth. But I mean, I have. There are some people who go too far. And they say no. All the church fathers believe the earth is round, and that's I don't think that's accurate.
I think
not even old secular pagan scholars would have said that. Maybe most of them would have said. I can probably also say I'm going to go on limb and say probably most of the church fathers we have just simply accepted the idea from the then scientific consensus of the day. You might say it wasn't science of the day; it was natural philosophy. They called it that the Earth is round. They just didn't, they just thought, okay, it'd be like today if someone says, "Do you accept nuclear weapons as being real?" I'm like, yeah, I do.
Yeah, well, that's
someone
exactly,
says I don't believe in nuclear weapons. I'm not going to get in a big. I'm not.
And that is actually a point of contention right now, whether nuclear weapons are real. But
I mean, it's not. It's a contention on the internet, not a contention.
But there's a reason for it, and I think we should address the deeper reason behind
There's doubt about everything.
It's a distrust in institutions in a global sense.
And who can blame them?
Yeah, exactly. When you start seeing massive amounts of lies,
this is why even though I accept the spherical Earth, I don't get upset when people say this stuff, because if why would I get? I mean, it's like, do you remember that case? I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you remember that case that happened 10 years? You can find the NPR article from like 10 years ago of a science teacher in Nebraska who was upset that her middle school science students were arguing with her that the Earth was flat, and she did not know how to argue against it, and she was being embarrassed in class, and so she had to tell them, "You got to be quiet," and they're like, "Why are you silencing us?" And that just made it worse. All right, well, and then they had to bring in somebody from the National Science Education Institute or whatever to argue with this student, and it was just like catastrophe. All right, it's just comical catastrophe.
I remember that.
That if you are a middle school science now. If you're a middle school science teacher, and you're the what we know what was true, most of their understanding of science is simply authoritative expositions. All right, this is what we were taught in the books. This is what we believe. Maybe they went through some very brief way of proving it, and they didn't. That's what
that was it.
And they can't say. Now, if it was me, I would simply say, you know what I'd say? I'd say, look, you can argue about this. That's fine, but you got to pass the test, and I can't control it. Now, if I said that, I'd be fired. I remember that happened when I was growing up. There was a history teacher who said he didn't agree with a lot of things in the history book, but he said, "Look, you got to believe what's on you got to just answer the course." But you weren't supposed to say that because they wanted to have the facade of free investigation. But it was this ridiculous rigmarole. I'm sorry to cut you off there. Continue.
Well, yeah. Well, one of the things I will say this is that one of the most well-known flat earthers in recent memory was actually praised, I believe it was by a NASA scientist, because he was creating his own rocket to prove that the Earth was flat, and actually created a successful propulsion test, which took him something like
he died. Did he die in the rocket test or something?
He didn't die in the test. He died of like a heart attack like a week later. It had So it was, the point is, it's just interesting that even a question like that can produce sufficient scientific inquiry to learn and create new things. So I leave the question open. I personally believe in a round Earth. I don't. If someone says I don't, I mean, you go with what your eyes say.
It would be somewhat comical, and actually I would actually favor I would actually like the idea that they could discover the Earth was flat, because it would overturn so much of what these people running. I mean,
it would be chaos. It would be absolute chaos.
That's maybe I shouldn't phrase it like that.
Yeah, but, maybe. All right, so let me see here. Blind G Tech says, found the article about the Jerusalem bishop. It's 5 years old. Okay. Saba the Saint said Metropolitan Valentine did that to Gregory of Petersburg. Yeah, the Indiaslavius arch heretic. I didn't want to say his name. That's kind of who I was talking about. Okay. So I'll just skip that stuff there. And let me say, Saba says, probably wouldn't suggest sending this stream to Seraphim. Don't know what we said that might have caused a problem, but in any case, I mean, as I said, these questions, if they're not directly related to the teaching of the church concerning salvation, they're probably going to be open questions.
Now, remember, there are issues. I mean, obviously, theology impinges upon history.
Yeah.
Okay. So you cannot say, well, I believe in the resurrection as an abstract theological proposition, but not as an historical fact. That's nonsense. That's blasphemy. That's something like late 19th. That sounds like 19th and 20th century German Protestantism. Like,
well, this is why Darwinian evolution is so much more dangerous than, say, for example, the flat Earth or round Earth controversy, because quite frankly, it's a discussion of how human beings came into existence, and it attempts to give a quasi-religious solution that is not Christian.
It's a continuous attempt to remove God through any means, from the equation.
Yeah.
To remove divine intervention in history, to deny one's senses, to deny one's internal conscience, to deny everything, and to create a facade, a false worldview, and to impel it on people for decades and now over almost we're going to be going on 200 years. It's pretty soon of increasing Darwinian pressure, and to the point where I've encountered Christian people who call themselves professing Christians. I'm not going to doubt their sincerity, who they will get upset if you say you don't believe in Darwinian evolution, or you only believe the Earth is 7,500 years old, and they'll get just even more upset than some atheist relative, because they were drilled in. They had such an inferiority complex in school, where the teacher was attacking them or other students were, that they want to be more Darwinian than the Darwinist. You know what I mean? And it's sort of sad, almost like a Stockholm syndrome. All right, where they feel that Christianity, this generic Christianity, is being like maligned by people arguing the traditional biblical narrative. It's also like you find people always bring. I remember this from 20 years ago, and people bringing up what's the Russian biologist exile, Theodore Dobritsky.
Oh, wow, yeah, his alternate. Yeah. That's the one with the alternate creation of the Earth or something.
Yeah, and he basically was. I think he may have technically died as a member of the OC. I don't know. He was cremated. I don't know if they ever gave him a funeral, but he was always brought up to me as like he's this biologist who's orthodox. But then if you start reading like other stuff he wrote, he believed in like reincarnation and transmigration. And I was like, this is some crazy Russian esotericist who just went to church occasionally, and they're claiming him as orthodox. Maybe I don't know. Maybe he did go to an ACA parish and they just didn't say anything to him, or he didn't say these things. I don't know. I don't know what the situation was, but he believed really crazy heretical things, and bringing him forward as well. This is the great example. I mean, it doesn't do your case very good. All right, and then attacking people, and they can claim, well, we're attacking. No, I mean, there is the attack on people who don't believe in the Darwinian, essentially atheistic worldview, even if they don't not claiming to be atheists. That's a real attack. People can get fired from institutions for that. You can lose academic funding. You could be, let's say, a scientist who's simply inventing doing research in like solar panels or what have you, okay, or solar physics. And I think I remember a case about this years ago, and they published like excellent research, but the Science Journal, guess what? They discovered that he was like a Presbyterian who believed in 6-day creation. And you know what happened? They pulled all of his material and they won't publish it. Even though his discoveries, and he wrote them, he said, look, my discoveries have nothing to do with evolution. And like, we don't care. All right. It's at an absurd level. And of course, and frankly, there's a wide range of people to whom Darwinian evolution and billions of years is fundamental to their worldview. All right, so fundamental that it's a religious view to them. All right, even if they claim they have a religion. And this spans the gambit or ambit. What's the word? Ambit or gambit?
Gambit.
It spans it from liberal atheists, all right, to extreme so-called right-wing people who have extreme racialist positions, to everybody in between. All right, that materialist worldview, communism. I mean, Marxism, it is fundamental that Marxism, for dialectical materialism and all that pseudo-historical process to be true, you need an unguided universe. You need a Darwinian, atheistic world. All right?
Yeah, and I thought it was funny. I saw a meme of somebody pointing out that, as you probably have heard of, this alleged simulation hypothesis.
Oh yeah,
which involved the strong anthropic principle, which basically is just God out of a box.
Yeah, everything looks like it's designed, so it must have been a computer. I mean, it's God who designed it. It's not a computer program.
Yeah, it's just cope because they don't want to say, okay, well, maybe there's a God. No,
if I walk into a junkyard and I see a fully assembled car, I'm going to say someone built the car. If somebody says, you know what, a tornado did it. No, a tornado did not assemble that car.
So now it's like now we're competing with the guy who's like aliens,
Well, and that's the interesting. Why is it you will see old? I mean, I haven't watched History Channel in years, but I remember back. I think the last time I used to watch History Channel on the internet, like in 2014. I don't know why. I just thought maybe there's some history. I mean, I just after a few. You know what it was. When Father Brendan was in like a rehab center, he would turn on the History Channel, and I would sit there and watch it with him. And I would sit it, and we would make fun of ancient aliens. All right. That was one of the things, I'd say here is, he would be cognizant. He was like, this is insane. And it would be a springboard for us to talk about this stuff. All right. Because, he's bedbound and he couldn't do much. So we talk about it. But here's one of the things I brought up to Father, and maybe Father Brendan brought it up to me. And he said, why is it you never see why is it they have the most outlandish Zacharias Sitchin, who's the other guy that's always on. There's a German guy who wrote there's also the guy with the weird hair, Sukalis, the Greek guy, who claims he's like Greek Orthodox. Anyway, why is it they have these crazy outlandish things about aliens building the pyramids, aliens building the cathedrals of medieval Europe, even? All right,
aliens building Machu Picchu, and I'm like, wow, exactly. Didn't they figure out how they did that?
But here's the thing: they will have that. But why doesn't the History Channel have a program from like the Institute of Creation Science on there?
Yep.
Now they claim, well, we have to have ancient aliens. There are multiple perspectives that can be given, as long as that perspective coincides with materialist Darwinian view. And ancient aliens does
materialist.
Darwinian exactly. View. Well, and even if it's an outlandish Darwinian view like ancient aliens, it's still within that realm. So in their view, it's more likely ancient aliens did the miracles of the Bible than that God did them.
Yep.
All right. You cannot, and if they have a program on History Channel, and I think this must be true today, and it's same maybe for ABC. When there used to be this thing where network television would have programs about around the time of Protestant Easter, although they oftentimes would delay it to Orthodox Pascha, which I thought was actually a secret insult. And they'd have John Dominic Cross and everybody there, and you would never see somebody on these programs who presented the traditional, or was allowed at any length of time to present the traditional position of the church.
Okay, now I will say this: the other Paul wants to come on. This is kind of my fault because I was critical about the errors of the Catholics video, and he wants to ask why. But more importantly, I should note that John Dominic Crossan, that is the guy of the Jesus Seminar who believed Jesus was eaten by wild dogs, was given an award by the Greek Archdiocese's Archbishop Maximus back in the 80s. Just thought I'd throw that out.
Not surprising.
It's not. It's not at all.
No.
All right. Okay. So welcome, and this is probably going to be our last call because it's already been 2.5 hours. But in any case,
okay.
Yeah. But can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Okay. First off, I do want to say the other Paul basically produced Craig's video. His production values were excellent, very easy to watch. It was a good video. Overall, I had some issues.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask mostly. What's like your were those issues like? I assume they're historical.
Yes, the biggest one that I had personally, and Bishop Enoch found a couple of other ones, but he felt they were more minor. But my thing was the whole the reduction of the schism involving Saint Meletius, because it didn't mention other parties. It kind of just mentioned Rome and Saint Meletius, not pointing out that Rome recognized another party, which made the situation far more confusing than it was. Mm-hmm. And it was that in that sense, sure, it answers a Roman Catholic who, can say Rome was wrong, but it doesn't totally represent the reality of the confusing nature of the situation. That's just
okay.
Do
you think that omission? I'd like to ask you about that, but do you think that omission of whatever this additional party was? Do you think that that harmed the case historically in terms of it being a response to Rome, or just with respect to it being a response to Rome, do you think it was adequate anyway?
I think just as a response to Rome, it would be sufficient. As an exposition of Orthodox ecclesiology, it causes a problem.
Okay, yeah. So who was this third party? I've never learned about this, or maybe I do. I just forgot.
Paulinus of Antioch.
Oh yeah, well Paulinus
of Antioch. Now, if other Paul, one of the you may have read these before. I'm sure if you've read, but I would also encourage reviewing them again. Would be what's called the tripartite history, which
Okay.
is the ecclesiastical history of Socrates, of Sozomenus, and of
Oh,
Theodore.
yeah.
And there's also, if you can find a copy of the ecclesiastical history of Rufinus of Aquileia, which is they translated it, but it's very difficult to get a hold of a copy. I've tried to order them on Amazon, and for whatever reason, they always cancel delivery. But they deal with the situation in Antioch, and the situation was essentially this. And maybe if I'm going over already acknowledged things, okay, that's fine. Maybe other details. Okay, so in the aftermath of Nicaea, what happens? The Arians sort of have to go underground because they're defeated. All right, they lose positions of power. St. Constantine simply just exiles them. There were 2 bishops at Nicaea that sort of recanted back to Arianism, like Theognis, and there was one other, and they were exiled. All right. So what happens is the Arian strategy, and this is how like Theodore and Socrates and Sozomenus describe it, was, well, we can't openly profess Arianism without getting into trouble. All right. So we have to eat around the edges about people like St. Athanasius and St. Eustathius of Antioch, who are the big upholders of Nicaea. Okay. So what happens is what? In the early 330s, they simply slander St. Athanasius. They claim, oh, he was preventing grain shipments. He was going to overthrow the emperor. He was involved in necromancy. Remember, there was a council at Beirut, a trial at Beirut, or maybe another one at Antioch, where they basically brought St. Athanasius there, and they accused him of, like, he was a murderer, he was a fornicator, he was a necromancer who killed and raised people from the dead to be his servitors. I'm not kidding. That's actually what they were saying.
Yeah. Was this the Synod of Tyre, or is this different?
It was either Tyre or Beirut. There were 2 trials they brought against them. Okay. And so what happened is they said, here's the mummified hand that he used for his magical rituals. and so then St. Athanasius said, oh, really? Well, then he brings out the guy who they claimed he had killed and mummified to use his necromancy for. And the guy's alive. And they're like, well, he just brought him back from the dead. That's what he did. So obviously they went ahead and they just said, oh, we're going to depose him anyway. And obviously St. Athanasius is like, I don't recognize this. This is just, I don't care what you're doing. But they never accused him of being a Trinitarian or believing in the homoousion. Why was that? Because if they start to accuse him of, Nicaea is still technically the law, the Emperor Constantine's still alive. If they go after the people holding Orthodox views for the real reason they want to go after them, which is because they hold the biblical view, which is, Orthodox, which is a, divinity of Christ, they're going to be revealed immediately. So they have to go after everybody for, made up moral charges.
False charges,
or they're a necromancer, or they're going to overthrow the empire. So they get rid of St. Athanasius. St. Athanasius has his own people who don't accept it. Then they get rid of St. Eustathius of Antioch, where they exile him. I think he dies in Armenia or Antioch. And what happens is they then put in, like, I think it's Eudoxus or Euzois, I can't quite remember, who was an Arian. Now, he was an Arian, but he wasn't necessarily deposing people who held, quote unquote, homoousian views. All right. Because the view was that as long as I'm in charge, I'm an Arian, I can preach whatever I want to preach. And, if you accept me, that's fine. Of course, there are major problems with having a bishop or a patriarch who's preaching open heresy, and you're sort of like, well, I guess it's fine. So what happens is they have this succession of people like that. Well, around 360 or 359, St. Eustathius reposes in exile. But they have this whole list of, like, Arian claimant bishops of Antioch. Well, around 360, the bishop of Sebastia, the former bishop of Sebastia, who we now regard as St. Meletius, is elected. All right, he's chosen by Acacius of Caesarea, who is the tongue of the Arians, as St. Gregory Nazianzen called him, the leader of the Arian party. Okay, although remember, the Arians oftentimes, when they controlled the church, which this time was not in communion with Rome and Old Alexandria, or with St. Athanasius, I should really say. Okay, because the Arians put, like, an Arian patriarch, Gregory of Laodicea, in Alexandria, but a lot of people didn't recognize him. They would say, well, they would sort of obfuscate their Arian position sometimes and sometimes not. That complicated history. So Meletius is elected. The Arians think this guy is on our side because, look, Arians, according to the church histories, and it's, Meletius was consecrated a bishop by the Arians. That's all of those Ecclesiasticals were saying. Well, Meletius takes over Antioch. Well, guess what? It turns out either he had never held Arian positions or he changed his mind. All right. And he public. All right,
yes, I'm here.
Let's continue this next Sunday. Because it's I'll only point to other Paul was that it's a complicated history. There were multiple parties involved.
And we understand that it wasn't designed for that audience.
Yes.
So that's
because I am familiar with that. Yeah,
and if that's the, I don't also want to say to.
I've just been involved in these discussions for years. That's the only reason I bring it up.
But it's worthwhile. It's a worthwhile discussion only because of the fact that it opens up a lot more topics for discussion. But that wasn't the intent of the video, and so in that sense, I kind of regret what I said, because if that wasn't the intent of the video, it's like if you're putting a simple essay or a simple thing together for just regular Roman Catholics, then I think it was good for what it was, even if it was not accurate. It's just not.
Yeah, that's right. It was a very targeted doco, not per se. It was for completeness on the specific issue it was aimed for.
And it's made all the right people mad. I saw a thing. I saw something. There's apparently a whole new. There's some Catholic YouTube channel where it's just devoted to attacking Orthodox now, and specifically the show you guys did, and they had a clip of Jay Dyer going off on Craig for like 5 minutes straight.
Oh, I know. Wow, Horace Godson. Yeah,
you pissed off all the right people. So
I'm gonna, Father Joseph, I'm gonna have to go. I've been.
I'm gonna go too soon. So you can benedicite.
All right, benedicite. All right, you go ahead.
I'll finish up. Okay. Anyway, so it's I mean it's already kind of too late to like fix what I said, in that sense. I mean, I recommended the video obviously, and so I'll keep doing that. But my initial, I guess my expectations were kind of high too, but everyone's expectations are relative to the person. And I just have I was waiting for the definitive answer from obscure document, and that's totally not what happened, because I'm not the audience. I was not the intended audience. So that's recognizing that, I do respect the work that you and Craig did.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And I do, what I'm still hoping for, I'm still banking on, it's still an open question. Will any of the big boys in the Rome side respond? Even if
I guarantee they won't. And my suggestion is just keep advertising the show over and over just to make them angrier.
Yeah, and hey, the epic part is that the first doco I did for Craig, the Who Started the Great Schism, that recently got around 18,000 views, and the Errors of the Catholics only came out 10 days ago. It's already at 16K. So we're pumping it up. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. It's good to hear. And Paul, if you ever want to come on, we're doing this live every Sunday, so we're going to do live call-ins.
Lovely.
And so you're always welcome. And,
thank you, man. Good to be here.
Not a problem. So you have a great night. Thank you very much. And I don't see any other questions except for the one on divorce. Aaron, I will address it directly because it's a big subject, but most of it's going to be canonical commentary. It's a question about divorce. I know we've done a show on it before, so we will look at it. South Padre Tony, thank you very much for your support of the show. And I have some questions for you, which I will ask you tomorrow. Since I don't see any other questions, guys, I would like to thank everyone who's listening, everyone who's commented, who's asked questions. That's what it's here for. And again, if you want to support the channel, just go to our YouTube page or nftu.net. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Have a great night, and may God protect us all.
God bless.
Good night, all.